It was around 11:45 p.m. when I first noticed that something wasn't right. I had been working the night shift at the convenience store on the outskirts of a small Pennsylvania town for nearly 6 months, and in all that time I had developed a rhythm. Nights were long, usually quiet, and occasionally a little weird, but nothing I couldn't handle. The store, a dimly lit place with flickering fluorescent lights and aisles stacked with cheap snacks and soda, always had a lingering chill, no matter how warm the summer nights were. I liked the quiet. It made counting inventory, cleaning, and stocking the shelves tolerable. But that night, there was a heavy tension in the air, like the store itself was holding its breath. I was in the back room, sorting through a shipment of chips and energy drinks, when I first heard it. A subtle scrape, like someone dragging their shoe across the linoleum floor. I froze, heart hammering, because I knew I was alone. My manager had left hours earlier, and the only other employee wouldn't come in until morning. "Hello?" I called out softly, trying to mask the panic in my voice. Silence. I stepped out from behind the boxes and glanced down the aisles. Everything looked normal. The doors were locked, the cameras were working, or at least I thought they were. Sometimes the old monitors flickered, showing nothing but static, but tonight, they were on. I laughed nervously to myself. "Just a rat," I muttered, though I didn't see anything moving. I went back to unpacking, trying to shake off the feeling that I was being watched. The scrape came again, this time from the front of the store near the register. I whipped around, heart racing, and this time the lights flickered, casting long shadows across the aisles. My stomach sank. I picked up the phone to call the local police, but the line was dead. Great, just great. I told myself it was probably just the wind, or maybe some loose ceiling tiles shifting, but the store didn't really have a lot of wind that late at night. I could feel my hands shaking as I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under the counter for emergencies. I crept toward the front, taking careful steps. The scrape sounded again, closer this time, almost right behind me. I spun around, swinging the bat instinctively, and hit nothing. My eyes darted around, scanning every shadow. Everything seemed normal, yet I could feel it. Something was there, watching, waiting. Then I saw it, a reflection in the glass door. A figure, tall and thin, with ragged clothes, standing just outside the door. I froze. My throat went dry. It wasn't moving much, just standing there, looking at me. The streetlights outside were dim, barely illuminating the cracked asphalt parking lot. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I swallowed hard and tried to tell myself to stay calm. "It's probably someone messing around," I whispered, though my voice didn't convince me. I edged toward the door, hoping to get a better look, when the figure suddenly disappeared. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. Nothing. My heart was racing so fast, I thought it might burst. I went back to the counter, trying to rationalize. Maybe it was a reflection from the road, maybe a trick of the shadows. But then the scraping started again, this time inside the store, coming from the aisle behind the candy section. I could hear it moving slowly, deliberate, like it was stalking me. I grabbed my flashlight from under the counter and flicked it on, sweeping the beam across the darkened aisles. Nothing, just rows of candy, chips, and soda cans. I forced myself to take slow breaths. I told myself I had imagined it. That had to be it. But then the voice came. Soft, low, almost a whisper, but distinct. "You shouldn't be here." I jumped, swinging the bat toward the empty aisle. The beam of my flashlight caught something moving in the corner of my eye, just for a second. A shadow, flickering. I swung again, harder this time, and my flashlight hit the floor. The batteries rolled away with a clatter. I knelt down, fumbling to grab it, and that's when I felt it. A cold, icy pressure on my back, like someone was leaning into me, pressing me into the floor. I froze. My limbs refused to move. My mind screamed, but I couldn't turn around. Then it whispered again, right in my ear. "I see you." I bolted upright, spinning around, bat raised, and there was nothing. The store was empty. The lights flickered again, and a cold wind swept through the front door, even though I was certain it was locked. I rushed to check it, fumbling with the lock, heart in my throat. It was secure. I slammed the door shut, leaned against it, and tried to convince myself I was losing it. The scraping continued, moving slowly around the store. I could hear it near the back room now. The temperature had dropped drastically. My breath came out in visible puffs. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but my phone was in the car, and I was too scared to leave the counter. I considered running, just grabbing my stuff and leaving, but the feeling of being watched made me freeze in place. I could sense it moving around the aisles, never quite showing itself, just circling me. I gripped the bat tightly, muscles tense, ears straining for any sound. Then the cameras went out. One by one, the monitors on the wall went black. Panic surged through me. The hum of the fluorescent lights dropped to a low, eerie buzz. I felt completely exposed, completely alone. I decided to hide in the storage room. I could barely breathe as I crawled in, shutting the door behind me. I pressed my back to the door, straining to hear anything outside. The scraping stopped. Silence. Then a slow, deliberate knock right on the other side of the door. 1, 2, 3. I screamed, pounding on the door, hoping someone would hear me. Hello? Anyone? Please. No answer. I stayed crouched in the corner for what felt like hours, listening. Every once in a while, I heard faint footsteps moving around outside the storage room, just out of sight. I couldn't tell if it was human or something else. My mind raced with thoughts of break-ins, kidnappings, or worse, but nothing matched the terror I was feeling. It was like the store itself had become alive, malevolent, and this presence was toying with me. Finally, at 2:30 a.m., I heard a familiar sound, the jingle of the door. Relief surged through me. Maybe a customer, maybe someone coming to check in. I grabbed the bat and swung the door open. The store was empty. The jingle had come from the door swinging in the wind, I realized. I sat down at the counter, exhausted, heart still racing. I tried to convince myself it was over, that maybe I had just had a nightmare. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The air in the store felt heavy, thick, like it was still holding something inside. At around 4 a.m., a delivery truck pulled up outside. The driver honked, and I went out to meet him, grateful for the human contact. We exchanged small talk as he unloaded boxes. When I went back inside, the store seemed normal. No shadows, no whispers, no scraping. I stayed on high alert until my shift ended at 6 a.m. Nothing else happened, and I left, feeling a mix of relief and dread. I didn't sleep well that day, or any day after. I tried to tell myself it was just stress, exhaustion, imagination, but I never forgot the feeling of that icy presence, of being watched and hunted in the place I thought was safe. Weeks later, I learned that a man had been found dead in an abandoned house just a few blocks from the store. He had lived there alone and had been missing for several days. Police never explained how he died or why there were scratches on the walls, marks like claws. I shivered thinking about it. Could he have wandered near the store? Or had something followed him here? After that, I quit the job. I couldn't go back. But even months later, driving past the store at night, I swear I see shadows in the windows, always just out of sight, watching. Sometimes I think I hear the scrape, the whisper, "I see you," carried on the wind. People tell me I'm imagining things, that the stress of night shifts and isolation did it to me. Maybe they're right, but the memory is too vivid, the fear too real. I still wake up at night, drenched, convinced there's someone standing just outside my bedroom door, waiting for me to look. I know I'm not alone. I know that whatever it was that night, it didn't stay in the store. It followed me. It watches. And I can't get rid of that feeling, no matter how far I drive, how bright the lights are, or how many locks I put on my doors. Even now, as I sit here writing this, I can feel it lurking in the shadows of my apartment. It doesn't knock. It doesn't speak. It waits. And it remembers. I learned the hard way that some nights are not meant to be survived, that some presences are patient, and that the small towns we think we know hide horrors that never sleep. Story, the end. The fluorescent lights in the hospital hallway buzzed faintly, a low, unending hum that was almost comforting in its monotony. I had been working the night shift at St. Mary's General for nearly a year, mostly on the 3rd floor, the surgical wing. Nights were always slower than days, and for someone like me who could easily get lost in thought, it wasn't so bad. You got used to the odd hours, the quiet hum of the machines, and the occasional beeping of monitors. But there are nights that stay with you, nights that linger in the back of your mind long after your shift ends. And I had one of those nights that I'll never forget. I had just gotten to work around 11 p.m., grabbing my standard coffee from the vending machine outside the nurse's lounge. It was a cold November evening. the kind where the wind seemed to cut through your coat and whisper against your ears. The parking lot had been nearly empty when I walked in, and the automatic doors slid open with that clinical hiss that always reminded me I was stepping into another world, a world that functioned on its own rhythm when most people were asleep. I waved to the security guard, a grizzled man named Frank, who barely looked up from the crossword he was scribbling in the dim light of the booth. The night started uneventfully. I did my rounds, checked on the few patients who were awake, charted vitals, and listened to the faint echo of footsteps in the empty corridors. Around 1:30 a.m., I was in room 312, an older man recovering from heart surgery. He'd been restless all day, trying to sit up or adjust himself, and I helped him reposition and made sure his monitors were stable. Afterward, I left the room and continued down the hall. That's when I first noticed the smell, a sharp metallic scent that didn't belong in a hospital. Blood, but not just the normal faint hospital smell. This was strong, immediate, like someone had spilled it recently. I frowned and followed my nose down the hallway, thinking maybe one of the surgical rooms had some leftover mess. But the hall was empty. No open doors, nothing out of the ordinary. I shook it off and told myself I was imagining things. The stress of night shifts can do that. Still, I made a mental note to check the supply closets just in case, though I didn't really expect to find anything. Around 2 a.m., things started to feel off. I was walking back toward the nurse's lounge when I noticed the janitor, who usually worked quietly in the back, was mopping the floor near the elevator. Only he wasn't moving. He was just standing there, mop in hand, staring at the wall like he was frozen. "Hey, Ed," I called, but he didn't respond. I stepped closer, and the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to get louder, almost pressing against my ears. Ed turned his head slowly, very slowly, and smiled at me, but it wasn't a normal smile. It was too wide, too fixed, and his eyes looked almost hollow, like he wasn't entirely there. I blinked, and just like that, he went back to mopping, as if nothing had happened. I tried not to think about it, chalking it up to fatigue. But by 3 a.m., the building had a different energy. The usual hum of machines and quiet footsteps in the distance felt amplified. I was in the supply closet on the second floor, restocking gloves and gauze, when I heard it, a soft, dragging sound coming from the hallway. It was faint, but it had a rhythm. Tap, 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 like someone was walking with heavy boots, but dragging their feet. I froze. There was no one in sight when I peeked out. Just the long stretch of hall illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights, everything sterile and silent. I convinced myself it was probably the cleaning crew finishing up late, but a knot of unease had settled in my stomach. By 4 a.m., I was back in the nurse's lounge, trying to keep my mind off things with paperwork. That's when the phone rang. It was the room phone for 312, the patient I had just checked on. I picked it up. "Hello, this is Emily from the nurse's station. How can I help you?" Silence. Just heavy breathing, slow, deliberate, but not from the patient. I frowned and said, "Mr. Hawkins, are you trying to call?" Still nothing, just that breathing. Then faintly a whisper, "I can't." The line went dead. My heart was pounding. Mr. Hawkins was asleep, and he wasn't capable of picking up the phone himself. I called his room, no answer. I decided to check on him personally, walking the eerily quiet hallways with my flashlight cutting a thin line through the darkness. When I entered his room, everything looked normal at first. The monitors were steady, he was asleep, and the room smelled faintly of antiseptic, not the metallic tang I had smelled earlier. I let out a shaky breath and left, telling myself it was probably some weird prank, though I didn't know who could be in the hospital at this hour. By 5 a.m., things escalated. The dragging sound had become a rhythm I could not ignore. It followed me from floor to floor. I was in the ICU, charting vitals, and it felt like the sound was just outside the door, circling the wing. I asked the night tech to check it with me, but when we opened the doors, nothing was there. The hallways were empty, the lights flickering occasionally, and every time I turned a corner, I felt as though someone, or something, was just beyond my sight, moving silently. Then I saw it. At the end of a hallway near the surgical wing, a figure standing completely still. Tall, thin, hunched slightly, dressed in what looked like a nurse's uniform from decades ago. Its face was obscured by shadow, and it didn't move when I stepped forward. I called out, "Hello? Are you okay?" The figure tilted its head unnaturally, almost 180 degrees, and then disappeared. Not walked away, not turned a corner, just gone. My stomach dropped, and I realized I hadn't felt fear like this in years. I tried to rationalize. Hospitals have old wings, old staff quarters that aren't in use. Maybe it was a reflection or my mind playing tricks. But when I returned to the nurse's station, the phone rang again. Same number, room 3112. I answered with trembling hands. Hello? A child's voice this time, soft and pleading. Help me, please. I dropped the phone. The line went dead again. I ran to the room. Mr. Hawkins was still there, asleep, but something was different. The air felt heavier, like the room had gotten colder in the last 30 seconds. I wrapped a blanket around him and whispered reassurances, but my voice sounded strange, echoing off the walls. That's when I noticed the scribbled writing on the bedside whiteboard, something I was sure hadn't been there before. In shaky, uneven handwriting, it read, "You shouldn't be here." I called security. Frank came up, grumbling, and we did a full sweep of the floor. Nothing. No one. No sign of forced entry. Every door was locked, every hall empty. Yet, the feeling of being watched never left me. By 6 a.m., I was at the end of my rope. I had 2 more hours before the morning shift, and I could feel the exhaustion clawing at me, my mind fraying. I tried to stay busy, charting, checking patients, but every sound, the creak of the ceiling, the faint whisper of air vents, the dragging footsteps made me jump. Then it happened. I was walking down the hall toward the elevators when all the lights flickered, then went out completely. Total darkness. My flashlight barely illuminated the end of the hall, and I saw them. Figures, maybe 5 or 6, all in old-style nurse uniforms, their faces twisted in silent screams. They weren't walking, not exactly. They floated, gliding just above the floor, coming closer. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst from my chest. I stumbled backward, hitting the wall, and they were gone. Just gone. I ran to the elevators, praying for them to work. The doors opened, and I bolted in, pressing the button for the ground floor. The elevator shuddered, lights flickering, the cables groaning as if under strain. When I reached the lobby, Frank was waiting, looking pale and uneasy. He didn't ask questions. He just guided me to the security office, where the cameras had captured something strange. Figures moving through hallways, vanishing into thin air. One camera even showed the figure at the end of the surgical wing, staring directly at the camera, tilting its head, then disappearing as if it had never existed. By the time the morning staff arrived, everything was back to normal. The lights were stable, the halls quiet, the patients awake and well. But I knew what I had seen, what I had felt. I never stayed alone on the night shift again. Weeks later, I asked around about the 3rd floor, about old wings and previous staff. I discovered that years ago, a nurse had died on the night shift under mysterious circumstances in that very wing. They said she had been found after hours, collapsed near room 312, and no one could explain why. Staff whispered that some nights she never left. I never forgot the dragging sound, the cold air, the whispering voices, or the figures in the old uniforms. Every time I walk past an old hospital wing now, I remember that night. Some things don't leave when you see them. They follow you in the corners of your mind, haunting your quiet moments. I still get chills just thinking about it. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear the faint sound of footsteps dragging across an empty hallway. Even now, years later, I avoid hospitals at night when I can. And I warn anyone I know who works the night shift, be careful who or what you meet in the dark. The hospital has its own rhythm, and sometimes it doesn't like outsiders. Story the end. It was a Monday night when I first started my overnight shift at the old distribution center on the outskirts of Cleveland. I had taken the job because it paid well, and the night hours fit my schedule. Truthfully, I didn't think much about it. It was just another warehouse job, another stack of boxes to move, another night of nothing. But that first night, something about the place felt off. The building was massive, older than I realized when I first walked in. The walls were lined with concrete and steel, and the fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting long shadows across the empty aisles. Most of the time, I was alone. Occasionally, the night security guard, a guy named Joe, would check in, but he had his own rounds, and I had mine. The first few hours were normal. I sorted inventory, checked shipments, and made rounds, keeping my headset on for communication with the main office. But around 2:30 a.m., the air seemed to change. It became heavier, almost humid, despite the winter chill outside. I brushed it off as imagination. The warehouse had old ventilation, and nights were always colder than the day. Then I heard it, the first sound, a slow, deliberate footstep echoing across the metal floor. I froze, listening. The only people supposed to be in the building were me and Joe, who was on the opposite end of the complex. My stomach sank. I called into the headset, "Joe, you moving around?" Silence. Just the faint hum of machinery in the distance. I shook it off, assuming it was one of the old pipes expanding or contracting. But the footsteps didn't stop. They got closer. Deliberate. Echoing. Heavy. I could feel the vibrations through the soles of my boots. I decided to check the nearest aisle. I rounded the corner, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting through the darkness, but saw nothing. Boxes stacked to the ceiling. Empty. My heart was racing. I checked the surveillance feed on my tablet. Nothing. Every camera showed empty aisles, still shadows in every corner. But I knew I wasn't alone. It started happening more frequently over the next week. Shadows at the edge of my vision, soft whispers in the distance, things moving just out of reach of the cameras. Joe thought I was imagining things. He told me, "Old warehouses are like that, man. Creaks, drafts, shadows. You'll get used to it." I wanted to believe him, but something deep inside me didn't. One night around 3:15 a.m., it escalated. I was walking down the main storage aisle when I saw her. A figure at the far end, barely visible, but definitely human-shaped. She was wearing a tattered dress, white, almost glowing in the dim light. She didn't move, just stood there. My flashlight flickered as I shone it in her direction. Then she vanished. Not walked away, just gone. I tried to rationalize it. Exhaustion, maybe? Stress? But I had taken longer shifts before without seeing hallucinations. The feeling in my gut told me this wasn't in my head. The following night, I arrived early to prep for the shift. I found a new marking near the loading dock, scratches on the concrete floor, deep and long. Nothing else, no footprints, just those scratches like claws. I called Joe immediately. He came over, flashlight cutting through the shadows. He knelt down, examining the marks. "These are weird," he admitted. "I've been here a long time, and I've never seen anything like this." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The nights continued, and the phenomena became more aggressive. Boxes would topple over in aisles where no one had been. Palms would press against my shoulders from behind, only to vanish when I spun around. Whispers became voices, faint at first, calling my name. Always my name. One night, around 4 a.m., I was doing my usual sweep of the east wing. The power flickered, and all the lights went out for a few seconds. When they came back on, a figure was standing at the end of the aisle. A tall man, completely black, no discernible features, just a silhouette. My heart froze. I blinked. He didn't move, didn't make a sound. Then he raised an arm slowly, pointing at me. I ran. I sprinted down the aisle, my breath sharp in my chest. I reached the exit, banging on the door, but it was locked from the inside. I screamed into the radio, "Joe, open the door!" Static, then nothing. Silence. My flashlight began to flicker, the beam catching on something, writing, scrawled on the wall in what looked like soot. "Leave now." I bolted to the nearest office, finding a phone. The line was dead. I was trapped. That night, I finally saw her again, the girl standing in the corner, face pale, eyes black. She tilted her head, mouth opening in a silent scream. I froze, paralyzed. Then a voice, loud and distorted, came from the intercom. "You should not be here." I don't remember exactly what happened next. I ran. I don't know if I passed out or if I was just hallucinating from fear, but I woke up outside, the warehouse behind me. The sun was rising. I called Joe. He never answered. I called the police. They found the building empty. No scratches, no markings, nothing unusual, just the old warehouse, silent as ever. I quit that job the next day. I never went back, and I told no one about what I saw. I tried to tell myself it was stress, sleep deprivation, a mix of the two. But I can't shake it. Even now, when I drive past that part of town, I feel it. The eyes on me, watching from the darkness, waiting for the night. Months later, I got a text from an unknown number. It was a picture of the warehouse, taken at night. In the photo, I could see the shadowy figure, pointing, and scrawled across the wall in the darkness, unmistakably, were the words, "You didn't leave." I sold my car, moved to a different state, tried to start over, but the nightmares followed. I dream of that warehouse every night, the creaking floors, the flickering lights, the whispers. Sometimes I wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, because I know if I ever went back, I wouldn't make it out alive. Years have passed, but I still check the news, old building permits, anything to see if the warehouse is still standing. Sometimes I see stories about the place, strange fires, missing people, unexplained accidents. Each time I feel a cold pit in my stomach. They're still there, waiting, watching, and I know without a doubt they're real. I've tried talking to people about it, friends, coworkers, therapists. They all say the same thing. It was stress, trauma, maybe a hallucination. I used to believe them. I wanted to believe them. But there's no explaining the sound of footsteps following me when no one is there. There's no explaining seeing someone vanish in front of your eyes. There's no explaining the claw marks that appear overnight or the whispers that grow louder when the lights go out. Last month, I moved into a new apartment. Quiet, modern, safe. Or so I thought. Last night, at exactly 2:33 a.m., I heard it. A soft whisper, right outside my bedroom door, calling my name. I froze. The air got heavy, suffocating. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but deep down I knew. They're still following me. They never left. Story. The end. It started like any other Tuesday night. I had been working the night shift at the Pinecrest Medical Center for almost 3 years, and by now, I knew the rhythm of the hospital after dark. The day staff had left by 6, leaving me, a night nurse named Karen, and a skeletal maintenance crew responsible for keeping the building running. The air had that sterile chill that never seemed to leave, even when the heating was on full blast and the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above each hallway, flickering now and then like nervous eyelids. I clocked in at 11 p.m., pulling on my uniform and checking the patient roster. Pinecrest was small, only about 70 beds, but the night shift always felt larger, more hollow, more echoing than during the day. I liked to think it was the quiet. The kind of quiet that made you aware of every little sound, the hum of the vending machines, the distant squeak of a wheelchair, or the faint echo of footsteps when you were sure no one else was around. That night, things began innocuously. Mr. Langley in room 314 needed his vitals checked. Mrs. Hammond in 317 had trouble sleeping and requested a glass of water. I moved down the dimly lit corridors, flashlight clipped to my waistband, notebook in hand. Everything was routine. But routine in a hospital at night has a way of feeling eerie. The hospital seemed to breathe around me, the soft thrum of machines syncing with my own heartbeat. It was around 1:30 a.m. when I noticed the first oddity. Room 302 was empty on my checklist, a patient discharged that morning. The door, however, was ajar. I paused at the threshold, expecting a cleaning cart or a maintenance worker. There was nothing, just darkness. My first thought was fatigue. Night shifts often warped perception, made shadows seem sinister. I nudged the door open with my foot. The room was empty, the bed neatly made, the monitors unplugged. Nothing out of place except the air felt heavier, like a weight pressing against my chest. I shook it off and moved on. By 2:15 a.m., I was back on the West Wing, checking on Mr. Thompson in 322. He was a veteran, quiet and withdrawn, and usually slept through the night. That night, he was awake, staring at the corner of the room as though someone or something was there. "You okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He didn't answer immediately. Then he whispered, "I keep seeing her." "Seeing who?" "The lady in white. She's always standing there, watching." I glanced at the corner, the shadows pooling there. "There's nobody there, Mr. Thompson. Maybe you're dreaming." He shook his head, gripping the blanket tighter. "I'm awake. I see her every night. She doesn't move, just stares." I smiled weakly, chalking it up to his age and medications, then finished my check and left the room, trying not to let a chill crawl up my spine. At 3 a.m., the power flickered. Nothing major, just a brief stutter in the lights, but enough to make the hospital feel like a different place. In the momentary darkness, I could swear I heard a door slam somewhere down the east corridor. I stopped and listened. Silence. Then a whisper, barely audible, like someone exhaling my name, "Karen." I spun around, flashlight raised, heart thudding. The hall was empty. My mind tried to rationalize. Just the wind, the AC. I'm imagining things, I muttered to myself. But my pulse didn't slow. By 3:30 a.m., I was in the supply room, restocking gloves and bandages. The hospital was quiet except for the distant hum of the ventilators. I glanced at the clock. That's when I saw it. On the monitor I kept from the supply room window looking into the hallway. A figure, pale, indistinct, standing at the end of the corridor. At first I thought it was a nurse who had come back to grab something, but the figure didn't move, didn't shift, didn't blink. It just watched. I swallowed hard, heart racing, and stepped closer. The figure vanished as I approached. My rational brain insisted it was a trick of light or a reflection from the monitors, but deep down I felt the unease settling in like a weight on my chest. By 4 a.m. I had finished my rounds. Most patients were asleep, the night quiet, except for the beeping of IV pumps and the occasional murmur from the nurse's station. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not light, not the faint squeak of a wheelchair. Heavy, deliberate footsteps pacing outside the room across the hall. I froze. The only person on this wing was me. I called out, "Hello? Who's there?" No answer. The footsteps continued, circling, pacing, stopping, and starting. I checked the security monitors. Hallways were empty. No one. At 4:30 a.m., I decided to check the basement. It was standard procedure. Sometimes maintenance had to fix minor issues, and the call lights from the basement occasionally went off even when nobody was there. I grabbed a flashlight and descended the narrow concrete stairwell. The basement smelled of damp and rust, the fluorescent lights flickering intermittently. I started my rounds checking the mechanical rooms and storage areas. Then I heard it. The sound of a chair scraping against the floor. Slow, deliberate. I spun around. Nothing. Just the shadows of crates and old equipment. A cold breath grazed the back of my neck. I whipped around, shining my flashlight, and saw her. She was standing at the far end of the basement, head tilted, hair dark and stringy, a white gown hanging loosely from her frame. Her face was pale, eyes sunken, lips pressed together like she was holding back a scream. I froze, unable to breathe, unable to move. She didn't approach, didn't make a sound, just stared. I turned and ran up the stairs without thinking, adrenaline pounding, heart slamming against my ribs. I slammed the basement door behind me, catching my breath, sweat stinging my eyes. I tried to rationalize it. Maintenance worker in old uniform? Projection of stress? Fatigue-induced hallucination? But I had worked nights long enough to know the difference between stress and something else. This was different. By 5 a.m., I was back on the wards, attempting to calm myself with routine checks. But the hospital was off. The monitors beeped irregularly. Shadows seemed to linger longer than they should. Patients I had checked earlier appeared restless, eyes darting to corners I could not see. Mr. Hess Thompson was awake again, whispering, "She's here. I told you." I didn't respond. My hands shook as I adjusted his oxygen. I avoided looking at the corners of the room. At 5:45 a.m., I heard the whisper again. Clear this time. Right behind me. "Karen." I turned, expecting someone to be standing there. Empty hall. I ran to the nurse's station, slammed the drawer, grabbed the phone, and called security. No answer. Static. Then silence. By 6:15 a.m., the day shift started arriving. Their chatter filled the corridors, and suddenly the shadows receded. The oppressive air lifted. I didn't mention anything to them. Who would believe me? Overworked night nurse sees ghost. Doesn't exactly get you sympathy. That day, I avoided the basement. I avoided the West Wing. I avoided looking into corners. And when the night shift came around again, I considered calling in sick. But something kept me coming back. Part of me needed to understand, needed to face whatever it was. On the second night, I arrived at 11 p.m. again, heart heavy, flashlight in hand. The hospital was quiet, empty of the usual bustling night staff. By 1 a.m., I was back in the West Wing. I saw her again, not as clearly this time, more like a blur at the edge of my vision. I blinked, looked again. Gone. At 2:30 a.m., I decided to confront her, in a way. I took the basement keys, flashlight in hand, and descended the stairwell once more. The basement was cold, too cold. My breath came out in misty clouds. The chair was there, tipped over as if someone had been sitting in it. I called out, my voice trembling, "I know you're here. I'm not afraid." Nothing. Then I felt it, a brush against my shoulder. Ice cold. I spun around. Nothing. Just darkness. And then I heard a soft, almost melodic voice. "Leave." I froze. "Who are you?" I whispered. Silence, then a soft sigh, like wind through dead leaves. I ran. Up the stairs, through the halls, into the light of the nurse's station. My hands shook, and I felt as if someone was still with me, just behind my vision, whispering, breathing, waiting. That night, I didn't sleep at all. Not even after leaving Pinecrest at 7 a.m. I drove home in silence, windows up, doors locked, constantly checking the rearview mirror as if she might be there. I tried to tell myself it was fatigue, stress, something explainable. But deep down, I knew the truth. She had been waiting in that basement for years, or maybe she was waiting for me. I returned for my next shift, against my better judgment. I saw her again, in the same corners, same blur. She never approached, never attacked. She just watched. And slowly, I realized that her presence wasn't random. She was drawn to those of us who stayed too long, who noticed her, who could hear her whispers in the quiet hours. Nights stretched on, each one heavier, darker, more suffocating. Staff began to whisper about shadows that moved without reason, patients complaining about cold hands touching their faces in sleep, lights flickering with no explanation. The hospital, once a place of healing, became a place of dread. I never found out who she was or what she wanted. All I knew was that she existed, and she was patient. Patient in a way that made your skin crawl, patient in a way that made you doubt reality itself. Years later, I left Pinecrest Medical Center. I found work at another hospital, but the nights never felt the same. The echo of her whisper haunted me, a low, melodic murmur whenever I entered a dark hallway. Karen, Karen. I have tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself it was my mind playing tricks. But deep down, I know better. She waits. She always waits. And no matter where I go, some part of me will always feel her presence, just out of sight, just at the edge of reality, reminding me that the night holds more than silence. Story the end. It started on a Tuesday night around 11, when the streets outside the warehouse were empty, except for the occasional passing car and the distant hum of streetlights flickering. I had been working the night shift for nearly 6 months at this logistics company in Ohio, and by this point I thought I had gotten used to the monotony. The cold, fluorescent lights, the endless conveyor belts, the quiet hum of machinery, and the occasional chatter over the walkie-talkies. I wasn't prepared for what happened that night. Not even close. I had started my shift like any other, clocking in, grabbing a cup of coffee from the break room, and settling into my usual routine of checking inventory and scanning packages. The warehouse was massive, a cavernous structure with high ceilings and endless rows of shelves that seemed to stretch forever. At night, it had a particular eeriness. The shadows between the aisles deepened, and the echo of my own footsteps sounded unnervingly loud. I always joked with myself that the place looked like the inside of a horror movie set, but I never expected it to feel like one. Around midnight, I was on my second round, checking a section near the back of the warehouse that was usually quiet. My supervisor, a guy named Doug, had left for a delivery run, leaving me alone. I remember thinking it was strange how silent it was, even for the night shift. Usually, I could hear the distant rumble of forklifts, the clanging of boxes, or someone talking somewhere in the warehouse. But that night, it was as if the entire building had gone completely mute. My phone buzzed with a text from my girlfriend, which made me feel slightly better. "Almost done? Don't get lost in the warehouse, ghosts," she teased. I laughed at it, typing back a sarcastic reply before putting my phone away. I continued scanning boxes when I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible scratching noise. At first, I thought it was just the machinery or perhaps a rodent, but then it came again, more deliberately this time. It wasn't consistent with the normal sounds of the warehouse. My stomach tightened and I paused, listening. The sound seemed to be coming from the far corner near the storage racks, the ones we rarely accessed. I called out, "Hello? Anyone back there?" My voice echoed strangely in the empty space, but there was no answer. I shrugged, telling myself it was probably just a box shifting, or maybe even my imagination. I walked toward the sound cautiously, trying not to let my unease show. The closer I got, the colder it seemed to become, and I realized I was shivering even though the warehouse heater was humming. I rounded the corner and saw nothing at first, just empty shelves and rows of boxes. Then I noticed something odd. One of the boxes at the bottom of a stack was moving slightly, like something was inside trying to get out. I froze. I reached out slowly and lifted the box, but it was empty. My heart was racing. I muttered under my breath, "Okay, just a draft or something," and moved on, though the hairs on the back of my neck refused to lie down. I went back to my scanning, trying to shake it off. But that was when I noticed something even stranger. On the security monitor in the small office area, I saw a shadow moving, slowly, deliberately, almost gliding across the warehouse floor. I froze, squinting at the screen. There shouldn't have been anyone there. The doors were locked, and Doug was gone. I grabbed the walkie-talkie to call the other night staff, but there was nothing. Static, then silence. No response. My stomach sank. I considered leaving, but the warehouse protocol required that at least 2 people be present in certain sections before shutting down, and since Doug wasn't back yet, I was technically stuck. I tried to convince myself I was just tired. I had worked nights for months, and fatigue could play tricks on the mind. But this felt different. The monitor flickered for a moment, and then the shadow seemed to appear closer, right near one of the loading docks I had just walked past. I could feel my pulse in my ears. I debated calling Doug, but I didn't want to bother him unless I was sure. That was my first mistake. I decided to check the loading dock anyway. As I walked, the lights overhead flickered, casting long, jagged shadows across the warehouse floor. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt. It wasn't just cold, it was oppressive, like someone or something was watching me. When I reached the dock, I saw it, a figure standing in the shadows near the far end of the dock. It was tall, impossibly thin, and completely still. At first, I thought it was a worker, maybe another temp who had wandered in without me knowing. But the shape was wrong, too elongated, too rigid, like a distorted mannequin. My breath caught in my throat. I called out, voice shaking, "Hey, you okay?" No response. The figure didn't move. I took a tentative step forward, and that's when it tilted its head. Slowly, in a way that no human head could naturally do. I stumbled back, my stomach dropping. I realized then that I wasn't imagining things. This was something else entirely. I turned to run back to the office, but as I did, I heard the faint sound of dragging footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, echoing unnaturally across the concrete floor. I didn't dare look back. I bolted for the office, fumbling with the keys to get inside. My hands were slick with sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted out. Once inside, I locked the door and collapsed against it, trying to catch my breath. The warehouse was silent again, but not the kind of silence that comforts. It was the kind that stretches, that presses against your ears, that makes every shadow look like it's alive. I could feel it out there, just beyond the door, waiting. My phone buzzed again, and for a brief moment, I considered ignoring it, but curiosity or desperation got the better of me. It was a text from Doug. "Hey man, you still there? Why didn't you answer your walkie?" I didn't respond. I couldn't. I could barely process the figure I had just seen. I could only sit in the dim office light, listening. That's when I heard a whisper. Not over the radio, not from the phone, but from somewhere inside the office. It was faint, almost like the wind, but unmistakably human. "Don't leave." I froze. My mind screamed that it was impossible. No one else was in the building. The security cameras didn't show anyone entering, yet the voice was real, tangible, and it sent a cold, crawling fear down my spine. I spent the next hour pacing the office, watching the monitors, trying to convince myself I was hallucinating. But then the lights flickered again, and on one of the monitors, the figure appeared inside the office, right behind me. I spun around, heart in my throat. Nothing. Just the empty office. But the feeling of being watched was suffocating. I could hear it breathing, or something that sounded like it, just behind the closed door. I tried calling Doug again. Nothing. I tried calling 911, but the line kept cutting out. Panic was rising now, cold and overwhelming. I realized I had no way out. The warehouse had only one main exit, and if that thing was outside, I was trapped. Minutes or hours, I couldn't tell, passed. The shadows seemed to creep closer with each flicker of the lights. Then, from the monitor, I saw movement again. This time, it wasn't the figure. It was every shadow in the warehouse. They were shifting, crawling, writhing toward the office. I felt the walls of the building close in on me, and my mind started to fracture under the weight of fear. I don't know what compelled me, but I grabbed a fire extinguisher and flung open the office door. The warehouse was empty. At first, I couldn't see the figure. I thought maybe it had retreated. But then I heard the scraping again, this time coming from the ceiling. I looked up and saw it. Hanging upside down from one of the rafters, its head twisting toward me, long arms dangling unnaturally, eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. I screamed and swung the extinguisher. It hit something solid, but when I looked, it was gone. That was when I ran. I sprinted through the warehouse, every aisle a potential trap, every shadow a threat. I could hear it behind me, whispering, scratching, breathing. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop. I burst through the main exit, slamming the door behind me, and ran to my car. The parking lot was empty, bathed in pale streetlight, silent except for the distant hum of the city. I jumped into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and drove without looking back. The next day, I called Doug. I didn't mention what I saw. I didn't want anyone thinking I was crazy. But when I went back to work the following week, the warehouse was different. Not in a physical way, but in the way it felt. The shadows seemed heavier. The silence deeper. Doug mentioned they had found a stack of boxes oddly rearranged near the back dock. No one else had been in that area, and security cameras didn't show anyone moving them. I laughed it off nervously, saying maybe a mouse had gotten into them. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still feel it following me. The dragging footsteps, the whispering, the eyes in the dark. And I know that the warehouse isn't the only place it can reach. Since that night, I've avoided night shifts whenever possible. I've tried to tell myself it was stress, lack of sleep, hallucinations, but I can't. Because every time I see a shadow move just a little too fast or hear a faint whisper in the dark, I remember the warehouse. And I know it's still out there, waiting. I've never gone back after hours, and I never will. And sometimes late at night, I can still hear that same whisper in my apartment, soft and insistent, "Don't leave." Story the end. It was one of those nights that felt heavier than usual when I drove into the industrial district, the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio. The streets were deserted, and the air had that stale, metallic tang that always seems to hang around manufacturing plants. I had just been promoted to a night shift security supervisor at one of the larger warehouses in the area. My job was straightforward, or at least it should have been. I was responsible for monitoring the premises, checking the cameras, doing patrols every hour, and making sure nothing went missing. I'd done night shifts before, but something about this warehouse felt off. The first thing I noticed as I pulled into the lot was how quiet it was. Even for a night shift, this warehouse was unusually silent. No hum of machinery, no distant traffic, no voices from the few night owls in the neighboring buildings. Just a suffocating silence that pressed in against my ears. I shrugged it off and went inside, punching in my security code and flipping on the lights at the front desk. The main floor was cavernous, filled with pallets of industrial supplies stacked high and narrow corridors between them. I settled into my chair in front of the bank of monitors, sipping lukewarm coffee and scanning the feeds. Everything looked normal at first. Empty loading docks, shadows of steel beams stretching across the concrete floor, nothing moving. I called the night clerk, a young guy named Jeremy, to check in, and he sounded nervous on the phone. "You'll get used to it," I told him. "It's just a warehouse. Quiet's normal at this hour." He didn't sound convinced. About an hour in, I started hearing it. A faint scraping noise coming from the north side of the warehouse. At first, I thought it was just a forklift or maybe some loose packaging shifting in the air conditioning drafts. But the cameras didn't show anything. I panned through every angle twice, even checked the exterior doors. Nothing. Then came the whispers. Low, unintelligible, like someone muttering just out of earshot. I stood up, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I called Jeremy again, asking him if he was hearing anything, but this time he didn't answer. The line was dead. I grabbed my flashlight and started patrolling the warehouse. My footsteps echoed across the concrete floor, the beam of light bouncing off pallets, revealing only the familiar shapes of boxes and metal shelving. Every few minutes, I thought I saw a figure out of the corner of my eye, someone moving just past the edge of my light. But when I swung the beam around, there was nothing. By 2 a.m., I was starting to feel paranoid. The scraping had gotten louder, and now I could swear I was hearing the sound of footsteps following mine. Not mirroring me exactly, but just behind me, soft and uneven, like someone trying to stay quiet. I checked the security monitors again, but every camera feed was frozen for a few seconds, then flickered back to life, showing nothing. I made my way to the loading docks, where the sound seemed strongest. The massive metal doors loomed over me, and for a moment I imagined that if someone or something wanted in, it could just walk through those doors. I radioed the local police, saying I thought there was an intruder. They told me they'd send a patrol by, but that it might take a while. I was alone with the sound. Suddenly the scraping stopped. The silence was more terrifying than the noise had been. I swung my flashlight around, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I had to check. That's when I saw it. A shadow moving across the far wall, impossibly tall and stretching, almost like it was crawling along the ceiling. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt my knees go weak. I called out, my voice cracking, "Hello? Who's there?" No answer, just a faint whisper that sounded like my name. "Michael," I spun around, my flashlight catching the end of an empty pallet, nothing else. I backed up toward the main office, my heart hammering, and that's when I heard the metal scraping again, right behind me. I didn't look this time. I just ran. I got to the office, locked the door, and called Jeremy one last time. The line was still dead. I looked at the monitors. Every camera was static now, flickering in and out. And on the screen, for a split second, I saw him. A man, or something that looked like a man, standing in the middle of the warehouse, watching me. He wasn't in any of the cameras a second later. I spent the rest of the shift in that office, doors locked, lights on, listening to the occasional scrape and whisper that never fully revealed itself. By the time dawn came, the warehouse was silent again. I went outside to get some fresh air and saw tire tracks in the dust near the loading docks, tracks that didn't belong to any vehicle I knew had been on the property. I reported the incidents to my boss, who brushed them off as stress and exhaustion. "Night shifts get to everyone eventually," he said. I didn't argue, but I knew what I had seen. Whatever it wasn't human. I took the next week off, trying to convince myself it was imagination. But the first night back, the same thing started again. The whispers, the shadows, the impossible sounds. One night, the security cameras all went black at exactly 1:23 a.m., and when they came back, I saw hundreds of footprints in the dust on the floor, all leading toward the exit, but the doors had been locked. One night, I stayed later than usual to catch whatever was haunting the warehouse. Around 3 a.m., I heard a voice clear as day right behind me. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and there was nothing. I turned back to the monitors, and every single one was filled with a figure standing right behind me. I didn't need to look to know it was there. I ran for the doors, keys jangling, and when I got outside, I saw footprints in the gravel behind me. Dozens, all human size, but moving toward the warehouse. I never saw the person walking. The prints just appeared. I drove home, hands shaking, and never stopped seeing shadows out of the corner of my eye for the rest of that week. The final night, I wasn't going to go back. But my boss insisted. He threatened to fire me if I didn't cover the shift. I showed up reluctantly. The warehouse was the same, silent and oppressive. I patrolled the same corridors, flashlight shaking in my hand. Around midnight, I heard the whispers again. This time they were clear. "Get out, or join us." I froze, listening. The air turned cold, my breath fogging in front of me. I felt hands brush against my arms, though no one was there. The shadows in the corners began stretching, moving toward me, writhing along the walls. My rational mind screamed at me to leave, but my body was frozen, trapped in fear. Then I heard it, a low, guttural laugh that wasn't human. It echoed around the warehouse, bouncing off the metal walls. The monitors flickered, and in the brief flashes I saw them. Not one, not two, but dozens of figures. Tall, elongated, featureless faces standing silently, watching me. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I screamed for help, but my voice was swallowed by the darkness. Something cold grabbed my ankle, pulling me down. I fell to the floor, flashlight skittering across the concrete. The last thing I saw before I blacked out was the figures leaning over me, whispers growing louder, repeating my name over and over. I woke up hours later outside the warehouse, the morning sun burning my eyes. I had no injuries, no explanation for how I got there. My flashlight and keys were gone. I quit that day, refusing to go back, but I still get calls at odd hours, breathing on the line, whispers, my name. I don't answer. Sometimes I dream about it. The warehouse, the shadows, the whispers. And every time, I hear that laugh again. Months later, I found out Jeremy had quit after his second week. No one knew why, and when asked, he just said he'd seen things. My old boss still runs the warehouse, hiring night guards like me. I never hear from him directly, but I hear stories from the new hires. Shadows moving in the corners, footsteps echoing in empty halls, whispers calling their names. I don't know what it is, if it's some sort of haunting or physical entity or just a mass of something. All I know is I will never step foot in that warehouse again, and I warn anyone who works nights to stay far away. The dark isn't just quiet in that place, it's alive, and whatever lives in the dark is patient. It watches, it waits, and it doesn't like intruders. Sometimes I drive by the warehouse at night just to make sure it's still standing. And sometimes when the wind is right, I swear I hear the scraping again, just faint enough that I have to tell myself it's my imagination. But deep down, I know better. I don't talk about it much. People would think I'm crazy. But if you ever find yourself on a night shift in a building that feels too quiet, that smells too metallic, that stretches endlessly in empty corridors, just leave. Don't wait until you hear the whispers. Don't wait until you see the shadows, because once they notice you, there's no telling how long they'll let you go, if they let you go at all. Every night since then, I've kept my doors locked, my lights on, and my phone close. I never answer when it rings after midnight, and every so often, just as I'm about to drift off, I hear a faint scraping on my window or a whisper of my name, and I know it's still out there, waiting, patient, watching. I'm never working nights again. Story the end. The fluorescent lights flickered as I swiped my badge and stepped into the empty office building at 11:45 p.m. It was my first week working the night shift as a security guard at a mid-sized tech company in suburban Ohio. The building had a reputation for being quiet, sterile, and uneventful after hours, which was perfect for someone like me, someone who didn't mind being alone. I had done graveyard shifts before, but never in a place this large, this empty. The main lobby stretched out before me, its polished marble floors reflecting the dim, buzzing lights overhead. I hung my coat on the rack by the security desk, checked the monitors, and sighed. Another 12-hour night awaited. For the first few hours, it was exactly what I had expected. I walked the perimeter every hour, monitoring the cameras and logging routine checks. The janitor, a gruff man named Henry, waved at me as he finished up his nightly rounds in the building. "Don't let the quiet get to you," he said, his voice echoing through the empty hallway. "Sometimes it plays tricks on you." I laughed politely, assuming he was joking, but even as I walked past his empty janitor's closet, I felt a strange unease that I couldn't quite shake. Around 1:30 a.m., I noticed something odd on one of the monitors. The camera in the second-floor server room, which had been dark all night, showed a faint reflection of movement, like someone was standing behind the glass. I frowned, tapping the screen to zoom in. Nothing. The reflection disappeared. I leaned closer, but the room was empty. Probably just my eyes playing tricks, I thought. I made a note in the log about it anyway. "Check on second-floor server room," I wrote. "No one should be here." I grabbed my flashlight and headed up the stairs. The hallways were narrower on the upper floors, and the hum of the air conditioning sounded louder, the shrat almost like whispering. When I reached the server room door, I noticed it was slightly ajar. I was positive I had locked it when I did my first round. My heart started to beat faster. I pushed the door open, sweeping the flashlight across the room. Everything was in place, the racks of blinking servers, cables neatly tied, nothing out of the ordinary. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The hallway was silent, too silent. I was about to leave when I heard it, a soft, dragging sound coming from the far corner of the room. My pulse jumped. I shined the light across the floor. Nothing, just the shadows of the server racks. I forced myself to breathe slowly. It had to be a mouse, or maybe some loose panel shifting in the building's air system. I left a note in the log. Server room checked, no issues found, strange noise heard, possibly building settling. By 3 a.m., I was starting to feel the isolation. The building was completely silent except for my own footsteps echoing off the walls. That's when I noticed the faint smell of something burning, like paper left too long under a lamp. I walked to the nearest hallway, checking the office doors. Everything looked normal. I shrugged it off and went to check the security monitors again. That's when I saw it. On camera 14, the conference room on the first floor, a chair had moved. Not a huge shift, but it was closer to the center of the room than when I had last checked it at 12:30. I froze. No one should be there. I grabbed my flashlight and went down the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I entered the conference room, the chair was exactly where the camera had shown it. I spun around, scanning the empty room. I felt an overwhelming sense of being watched, like eyes were tracking my every movement. My stomach twisted. I tried to shake it off. I was probably just stressed from the long hours. I logged the incident and left. By 4:15 a.m., I had made my rounds twice more. Every time I checked the cameras, I thought I saw shadows moving just beyond the edges of the screens. I kept telling myself it was a trick of the light, a reflection from the monitors, or fatigue messing with my perception. But I could no longer ignore the sounds. Footsteps, soft and dragging, echoed down hallways I had already checked. Doors creaked open slowly and then shut again. The janitor's voice, gruff and low, whispered my name from empty corridors. I ran to the nearest door, only to find it locked, the hallway empty. Around 5 a.m., I was stationed back at the security desk. I tried to call the office manager, anyone, but the phones were dead. The intercom crackled, but instead of a voice, there was only static, punctuated by soft, deliberate tapping, like fingernails on metal. My flashlight flickered. I got up, intending to check the main floor one last time, but as I stood, I realized something impossible. The monitors had gone completely black, as if they had never existed. My radio crackled. "You shouldn't be here," the voice said. Not Henry, not any colleague. It was low, deep, and impossibly close, even though the office was empty. I froze, staring at the blank screens. The voice repeated closer now. "You shouldn't be here." I backed away from the desk, my hands shaking. The lights flickered again, then went out completely. I was plunged into darkness. The soft, dragging sound started again, circling me, echoing in every corner of the lobby. I could hear the air ducts rattle, the elevators hum, and then stop, as if someone or something was moving between floors in a way that made no sense. I stumbled to the emergency exit, fumbled with the door, and it wouldn't open. My heart pounded in my chest. That's when I saw it. A figure, tall and dark, standing at the top of the staircase leading to the second floor. Its shape was barely human, distorted, its head tilted unnaturally. I could not see a face, only the suggestion of one, shadowed and void-like. It raised a hand slowly. A whisper, cold and hollow, filled the lobby. "Go." I turned and ran, nearly tripping over the chairs and tables, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I tried another door, another exit, but all were locked, sealed. Panic clawed at me. The figure was moving now, descending the stairs toward me with impossible speed. I ran back to the security desk, hoping to find some tool, some weapon, anything. I grabbed the flashlight, swung it in front of me. The beam hit nothing. When I turned around, the figure was gone. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely hold the flashlight. I backed into the corner of the desk and pressed myself against the wall, trying to make sense of what was happening. Then the radio crackled again. Static first, then a whisper. "You can't leave. You shouldn't be here." The temperature dropped sharply. My breath fogged in the air. I could feel it, this presence, cold and heavy, pressing down on me, seeping into my skin. At 6 a.m., the building's front doors finally unlocked automatically. The first morning shift arrived to find me huddled behind the desk, pale, shaking, and silent. I tried to explain, but my words sounded absurd even to myself. The new security guard laughed it off, thinking I had just had a nightmare. But I knew better. I had seen something that defied reason, something that stalked the night, something that seemed to exist in the spaces between the floors, in the corners of rooms, in the reflections on glass and metal. I never went back to that building after that night. I quit the job immediately. But the memory didn't leave me. Every night, I feel it, the whispering, the dragging footsteps, the presence that watches from darkened corners. I've moved across 3 states, changed jobs, even started working day shifts. But I can't escape it. Some nights, when I'm alone in a quiet room, I swear I hear the faint hum of servers, the scrape of a chair, the whispered warning, "You shouldn't be here." Years later, I learned that the building had a dark history. The previous night shift guard had disappeared without a trace over a decade ago. His files, when dug up by curious reporters, showed the same pattern. Unexplained noises, strange shadows, cameras showing movement in empty rooms, whispers over the radio. No one ever found him, just like no one will ever truly explain what I experienced. The building itself seemed to feed on the isolation of night, on the vulnerability of those alone in its halls. I sometimes wonder if the figure I saw was even real, or if it was a manifestation of fear itself, born from the silence and the emptiness. But I remember the cold, the sense of being watched, the weight pressing down as I tried to move. I remember the whisper, soft and insistent. You shouldn't be here. I remember feeling trapped in a nightmare that was somehow real. To this day, when I walk into a building after dark, I check the doors, the windows, the corners of every room. I think about that night constantly. I can't shake the memory of the dragging footsteps behind me, the shadowy figure on the staircase, the whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. I try to tell myself it was fatigue, imagination, stress. But deep down, I know what I saw was real, and I know what I felt, the kind of fear that doesn't fade, the kind of horror that haunts the quiet spaces of your mind long after the night has ended. Sometimes I still hear it in my dreams, and sometimes when I wake in the dark, I swear I feel it standing just beyond my bedroom door, waiting for me to make the mistake of being alone again. The night shift changed me. It taught me that some buildings are not just empty spaces. They are alive in ways we don't understand, watching, waiting, and never forgiving the trespass of the living who dare to roam their halls when the sun is gone. I took the night shift job out of necessity, not choice. It was the winter of 2014 in Western Kentucky, and money had gotten tight after my father's health took a bad turn. I was 29, working odd construction gigs during the day, and I needed something steady, something that wouldn't interfere with the few jobs I could still scrape together. That's how I ended up as the overnight attendant at a truck stop just off Interstate 65. It wasn't glamorous, and it paid just above minimum wage, but it came with a predictable paycheck. The truck stop wasn't one of the big corporate ones with bright lights and fast food chains. Ours was older, independent, and had been there since the late 70s. The owner, Mr. Henry, was a wiry, gray-haired man who barely spoke above a mumble and had a habit of chewing the same toothpick all day long. The building itself was rectangular, with 12 fuel pumps under an awning in the front, a convenience store inside, and a narrow hallway that led to the bathrooms and showers for long-haul drivers. The back lot stretched into darkness, a gravel patch where rigs parked overnight. During the day, it buzzed with movement, diesel engines, voices, doors slamming, but after midnight it grew silent, the kind of silence you could hear pressing in on your ears. When I started, Henry's only instruction was, keep the register balanced, don't let nobody loiter too long, and keep an eye on the lot. I nodded like I understood, but that last part, keeping an eye on the lot, took on a heavier meaning the longer I worked. The first few weeks passed without incident. I got used to the rhythm. A couple drivers stopping for coffee and gas around midnight, the occasional drunk college kids stumbling in for chips, then long stretches of emptiness. I'd sweep the floors, restock shelves, and sit behind the counter, listening to the buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. At first, I thought the job would be easy, but the isolation wore on me. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, the world outside seemed to shift. The highway in the distance would grow quieter, and the store itself felt different, like I was on the edge of something I wasn't supposed to see. The cameras didn't help. We had 4 grainy black and white monitors mounted above the counter, showing the pumps, the lot, and the hallway by the showers. Half the time, the static blurred the feed, making it look like shadows moved where there shouldn't be any. One night, maybe a month in, I was refilling the coffee pots when I noticed movement on the monitor showing the back lot. A truck had pulled in, though I hadn't heard the rumble of the engine. I turned up the volume on the speakers that picked up outside noise, but it was dead silent. I squinted at the screen. The truck was parked crooked, halfway into another space, its cab lights glowing faintly. I waited for the driver to come inside, but minutes passed and no one entered. I finally stepped out from behind the counter and peered through the glass doors. The truck was there, a long white semi with no visible logos, but the cab was dark now. I couldn't see anyone moving. I debated whether to walk out and check, but something about it made my stomach knot. I went back to the counter and told myself I'd keep an eye on the cameras. When I glanced back at the monitors a few minutes later, the truck was gone. No sound of the engine, no headlights pulling out, nothing. The lot was empty again. I told myself maybe the cameras glitched. Maybe I'd zoned out and missed it leaving. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. After that, strange things kept happening. Some nights I'd hear footsteps in the back hallway when I knew the bathrooms were empty. Other times I'd catch movement in the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. Once, around 3:30, the automatic door at the entrance slid open on its own, the chime ringing through the store. I rushed out to look, but no one was there, not even a car on the road outside. The regular drivers sometimes hinted at it too. A man named Doug, who hauled produce from Alabama to Michigan twice a week, once leaned on the counter and lowered his voice. "You ever see him?" he asked. "See who?" I said. He smirked without humor. "Never mind, you'll figure it out if you stay long enough." Then he left without explaining. Another driver, a younger guy with tired eyes, once refused to park in the back lot. He filled up, bought a sandwich, and when I asked if he wanted to use the showers, he shook his head. "Not back there," he muttered, almost under his breath. "Not after last time." When I pressed him, he just walked out. By then, I'd started dreading my shifts. I still showed up, money was money, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something lingered in that place after dark. The worst night came in February, during a snowstorm. The wind howled against the glass and snow piled high around the pumps. No one had come in for nearly 2 hours, and I was dozing off on the stool behind the counter when the back monitor flickered. A figure stood in the hallway near the showers. At first, I thought it was a driver who had snuck in, but the image was wrong. The person looked too tall, their shoulders narrow, head tilted at an odd angle like it was hanging off a string. The camera quality was poor, but I swear their face looked blurred, as though the lens couldn't focus. I grabbed my flashlight and hesitated at the counter. Protocol said I should check it out, but everything inside me screamed not to. Finally, I forced myself down the hall, the beam of my flashlight bouncing off the linoleum. The bathrooms were empty. The showers, too. I checked every stall, every corner. No one was there. When I returned to the counter, shaking, I glanced at the monitor again. The figure still stood in the hallway, exactly where I had just been, but now it was facing directly toward the camera. I unplugged the monitors that night and sat in silence until sunrise. After that, I told Henry I couldn't keep working nights. I said the hours were killing me, that I needed something more stable. He just nodded, chewing his toothpick, like he already knew. It's been years since then, but I still dream about that place. In my sleep, I'm back behind the counter. The hum of the fluorescents above me, the cold wind rattling the glass doors, and always when the clock strikes 3, I see headlights sweep across the lot and a truck that makes no sound pulling into the dark. I wake up before it parks, every time. And sometimes, when I'm driving alone late at night and I see a rest stop in the distance, I swear I catch the faint buzz of static like an old security monitor flickering back to life. Story. The end. I was 26 when I took the overnight job at a gas station off Route 41 in southern Indiana. I'd been bouncing between jobs for a while. Construction, dishwashing, warehouse stocking, none of them stuck. The hours weren't great, the pay was worse, but I figured a night shift cashier gig would be easy enough. The station was one of those all-night spots with flickering neon lights, cracked asphalt around the pumps, and a smell of burnt coffee that lingered no matter how often you cleaned. It sat by itself on a long stretch of highway, the closest town 10 miles in either direction. At night, it felt like the world shrank down to just me, the buzzing fluorescent lights and the occasional stranger stopping for gas. At first, I didn't mind it. Nights were slow, which meant I could read or scroll through my phone between customers. Most people who came through were truckers grabbing coffee, locals buying cigarettes, or tired families refueling before pushing on down the road. I got to know some of the regulars. Dale, the long-haul driver who always bought 2 energy drinks at 2 a.m., Mrs. Green, an older lady who swore she couldn't sleep unless she had a scratch-off ticket, and the sheriff's deputy who sometimes parked outside just to keep me company for a few minutes. It was lonely, sure, but it was steady. Things started small. The first couple weeks were normal enough until I began noticing how often the lights flickered. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the row of fluorescents over the coffee counter would blink 3 times, go dark for a second, then hum back to life. Every night, like clockwork. I joked to myself that the building had a bedtime ritual, but when I mentioned it to the day manager, Carl, he just gave me a strange look. "That's been happening for years," he said, scratching his beard. "Electricians looked at it a dozen times. Wires are fine. Some things just are the way they are." I tried to laugh it off, but something in his voice stuck with me. The second thing was the door chime. Every time the front door opened, a sensor dinged at the register. One night, I was restocking the cooler with bottled sodas when I heard the chime. I got up, expecting to see a customer, but the door was shut and the lot outside was empty under the weak glow of the pumps. I figured maybe the wind rattled it. But then it happened again and again. 3 times that night, the bell dinged, and each time no one was there. I told myself I was overtired. Those shifts dragged, and I'd get into this half-dream state around 4 in the morning. But then came the whistling. It was faint at first, like someone whistling a tune from far down the highway, but it got closer. Some nights, I'd hear it weaving between the aisles when I was in the back, as if someone was walking through the store. A low, aimless whistle, off-key, but steady. The kind of sound that makes your skin prickle. The worst part? It always stopped the second I turned a corner. One night, around 2:45, I was in the back mopping when the whistle started up again. This time it was near the counter. I froze, leaning on the mop handle, listening. Whoever it was, they were moving slow, taking their time like they wanted me to hear them. I set the mop down and crept forward. My heart was hammering, but I told myself it had to be a customer playing around. When I reached the counter, no one was there. The whistle stopped, but the cigarette display behind me had changed. I swear to God, 3 packs had been pulled halfway out of their slots, like someone's fingers had just slid them forward. I didn't finish the mop that night. After that, the nights got heavier. The air felt charged, like the inside of a thunderstorm. Sometimes the security monitors would flicker, and for just a split second I'd see a shadow moving between aisles. Too tall, too thin to be a person. Sometimes I'd find things out of place, chips stacked neatly in the wrong section, candy bars standing upright like they'd been arranged carefully. I never caught anyone doing it. I thought about quitting. But rent was due, and there weren't many other jobs that would take me. I tried to keep my head down, tell myself it was just a weird building with bad wiring and my brain playing tricks on me. Then came the snowstorm in January. That night, the highway was dead quiet. Heavy snow fell in thick sheets, covering everything in white. I hadn't seen a single car in over an hour. The store was warm, but outside, the wind howled against the glass doors. Around 3:15, right before the lights over the coffee machine did their usual flicker, I heard the chime. Ding! I looked up, expecting to see someone stamping snow off their boots, but the doors were closed tight, no tracks in the snow outside. I checked the security camera, nothing but swirling flakes under the pumps. Then the whistling started. It came from the back aisle, winding between shelves of canned goods and cleaning supplies. Slow, deliberate, like whoever it was had all the time in the world. My stomach dropped. My first thought was to call the sheriff, but something in me hesitated. How could I explain it? "Hey, there's a sound in my store." I grabbed the flashlight we kept under the counter and stepped out from behind it. The whistle got louder. My boots squeaked on the tile as I made my way toward the sound. I turned down the back aisle and froze. At the far end, under the buzzing fluorescent lights, someone stood with their back to me. They were tall, maybe 6.5 feet, and thin to the point of looking wrong, their shoulders jutting sharp against a coat that didn't quite fit. Their head was tilted slightly, and the whistle spilled out of them, low and tuneless. "Sir?" My voice cracked. "Store's closed to loitering. Can I help you?" The figure didn't move, just whistled. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and took a step forward. "Hey!" That's when the lights flickered. For half a second, everything went dark. When they came back, the aisle was empty. I ran to the end, my pulse thundering in my ears. No footprints, no sign anyone had been there. Just empty shelves and silence shift that morning. I didn't sleep after my shift that morning. I sat in my apartment with every light on, staring at the wall, replaying it again and again. The next night, I didn't want to go in, but I needed the paycheck. I told myself I'd stick to the counter, not wander the aisles. I'd keep the radio on, keep moving, and maybe I'd get through it. Around midnight, a trucker came through, bought coffee and jerky, chatted a bit, then left. After that, nothing. Hours passed. At 3:17, the coffee machine lights flickered. I braced myself. The whistle started almost immediately. This time it wasn't in the aisles, it was behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly fell. No one was there, just the cigarette display, neat rows staring back at me. The whistle was close enough that I felt it in my chest. I shouted, "Get out!" My voice echoed off the glass doors. The whistle stopped. Then, slowly, the chime at the front door dinged. The doors didn't open, they didn't move at all, but the sensor went off again, and again. Ding, ding, ding. Like someone was stepping in and out over and over, taunting me. I grabbed my phone and called Carl. It rang 6 times before he picked up, groggy. "What?" "Carl, something's wrong. Someone's in here. Then call the sheriff," he muttered. I stopped. The chime had gone silent. The store was quiet again, Carl sighed. "Look, kid, I told you about that place. It's old. Weird shit happens. Finish your shift. You'll be fine." And he hung up. I wanted to quit right then, walk out into the snow and never look back. But I couldn't leave the register unattended, and some part of me, stupid, stubborn, wanted to prove I wasn't losing it. So I stayed. I stayed until dawn broke and the day shift arrived, and I left without a word. That was months ago. I lasted 3 more weeks before I quit for good. The whistles got worse, closer, sometimes right in my ear. I'd find things rearranged seconds after I turned away. Once, I swear I saw a face reflected in the freezer glass. Too long, too pale, eyes too black. I never went back. The gas station is still there, still hiring for nights. Every so often, I drive past it on Route 41. The neon sign buzzes weakly, the pumps glow under the canopy, and inside, I swear I see movement between the aisles even when no cars are in the lot. Sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, I still hear it. That thin, tuneless whistle drifting through the dark, reminding me of those endless hours under the buzzing lights. And I know I didn't imagine it. Story the end. The first night I started working at the small-town hospital in rural Ohio, I thought it would be an easy job. I was 28, fresh off quitting a job at a warehouse that burned me out after years of grueling labor, and I thought security work would be simple, mostly sitting at a desk, keeping an eye on things, and walking around occasionally. The pay was better than what I'd been making, and working nights suited me fine. I didn't have kids, didn't have much of a social life, and I liked the idea of fewer people being around. The hospital wasn't huge, maybe 100 beds total. They had a couple of wings for long-term patients, a small ER, and a psychiatric ward on the 3rd floor that everyone working nights seemed to avoid unless absolutely necessary. On my first night, the outgoing security guard, a guy named Tom, gave me a quick tour. He seemed eager to get out of there. He told me the usual: keep the front entrance locked after visiting hours, make sure nobody wandered in off the street, and check in with nurses every hour to let them know security was around. Then he mentioned something that stuck with me. 3rd floor, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. You'll hear things up there sometimes. Just ignore it. Patients get restless. Don't let it get in your head. I laughed nervously, thinking he was exaggerating, but the look on his face told me he wasn't joking. The first few nights went fine. I mostly sat behind the desk in the lobby, walked the halls once an hour, and occasionally escorted a drunk or belligerent visitor out of the ER waiting room. The building was quiet, except for the occasional sound of rolling gurneys, intercom announcements, or beeping machines from patient rooms. By my 5th night, though, I started to notice the hospital felt different after 2 a.m., like the air changed, heavier somehow, pressing down on me as I made my rounds. One night around 3 a.m., I took the elevator up to the 3rd floor. The psychiatric wing was mostly dark, with dim emergency lights casting a dull glow over the halls. Most of the patients were behind locked doors. I walked past each one, making sure everything was in order when I heard it. Footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, echoing just a beat after my own. I turned quickly, shining my flashlight down the hallway. No one was there. I waited, listening, my pulse thudding in my ears. Nothing. I convinced myself it was an echo. The halls were empty, the doors shut. But as I continued down the hall, I heard it again. Footsteps, lighter this time, like someone was trying not to be noticed. I spun around, my beam cutting across the hall, and for a split second I thought I saw the outline of a figure at the far end. But when I blinked, it was gone. I wrote it off as my imagination. Long nights, little sleep, too much caffeine. But it didn't stop. Each night, especially between 2 and 4 a.m., strange things kept happening. Sometimes I'd hear soft whispers, like a man and woman talking just out of earshot. The words were never clear, just a murmur that stopped the moment I tried to follow the sound. Other times, the elevators would arrive on the 3rd floor with no one inside. Once, when I stepped off the elevator, I swore I felt someone brush past me, cold and quick, though the hall was empty. One of the nurses, an older woman named Margaret, must have seen me looking pale one morning as her shift ended. She smirked knowingly. "You're starting to notice it, huh?" she said. "Notice what?" I asked. She lowered her voice. "This place changes at night. Always has. Don't ask me why, but security never lasts long here. They always think they can handle it, then they quit. Just don't go looking for things. That's where people mess up." Her words didn't sit well with me. I started paying closer attention to the cameras after that. The hospital had a small security room with monitors showing feeds from every hallway. Most nights, the cameras showed exactly what you'd expect: nurses making rounds, empty halls, janitors pushing carts. But one night, I noticed movement on the 3rd floor camera. It was Unit 3B, a hallway with 6 rooms. At first, I thought it was a patient wandering. A figure was moving slowly down the hall, stopping at each door. But when I leaned closer, I realized something was wrong. The figure was too tall, its limbs too long, moving unnaturally, like its joints bent in ways they shouldn't. It paused at one door, seemed to lean close, then continued down the hall before vanishing out of frame. I grabbed my flashlight and rushed to the 3rd floor. The hall was empty. The patients were asleep. The nurses swore no one had been walking the halls. I went back to the monitors, rewound the footage, and the figure was gone. The recording showed nothing. That was the first time I genuinely considered quitting. But I needed the money, so I stayed. Over the following weeks, the encounters escalated. I'd hear knocking on doors when I walked past, even though patients were asleep inside. I'd find wheelchairs positioned in the middle of halls where they hadn't been minutes before. One night, as I walked past the ER waiting room, I saw a man sitting there, middle-aged, wearing a flannel shirt, his face pale. I asked if he needed help, but he didn't respond. I turned to grab my radio, and when I looked back, he was gone. The cameras showed an empty waiting room. The worst night happened in late October. It was cold outside, frost forming on the windows. The hospital was nearly silent, except for a few beeping monitors and distant voices from the ER. Around 2:45 a.m., I took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The moment the doors opened, I felt it, heavier than before, like the air was charged. My flashlight flickered as I stepped into the hall. Halfway down the corridor, I heard the whispers again, but this time they were louder, clearer, coming from behind one of the patient doors. I leaned closer and I froze. They were saying my name, over and over. "David, David, David." My throat went dry. No patient there knew my name. I stepped back, shining my light down the hall. That's when I saw it, the same tall figure I'd seen on the monitors before. It was standing at the far end of the corridor, its head bent at an unnatural angle, its arms hanging too low. It didn't move at first. Then slowly it started walking toward me. I froze, my instincts screaming to run, but my legs wouldn't work. Each step it took echoed louder than it should have. When it was halfway down the hall, the lights overhead began to flicker violently. My flashlight cut out completely. I backed toward the elevator, fumbling with the buttons on my radio, but it only hissed with static. The figure was close enough now that I could make out its face, or what should have been its face. But there was nothing. Just a pale, smooth surface where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. The elevator dinged behind me. The doors opened, and I stumbled backward into it, slamming the button for the lobby. The doors closed, just as the figure reached the end of the hall. For a split second, I swear I saw its hand press against the elevator door before it slid shut. When the doors opened in the lobby, I ran outside into the cold night air, my breath fogging in front of me. I stayed out there until the sun rose. I didn't quit right away. I tried convincing myself it was exhaustion, stress, my mind playing tricks, but deep down, I knew better. Whatever I saw wasn't a trick of the mind. It was real, and it wasn't something I could fight or understand. 3 weeks later, I turned in my badge. I told them I couldn't work nights anymore, that the schedule was wrecking me. They didn't argue. The look the head nurse gave me told me she already knew why. It's been years since I worked at that hospital, but I still dream about it sometimes. I'll be walking those third-floor halls, hearing my name whispered from behind doors, the echo of footsteps following me. And sometimes, in the dark of my apartment, when the night is quietest, I think I hear it again. That slow, deliberate sound of someone walking just behind me. Story, the end. It was late January, the kind of bitter cold night where the air itself feels sharp in your lungs, when I started my second month working nights at a 24-hour shipping warehouse on the outskirts of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The building sat at the edge of an old industrial park, surrounded by empty lots and rows of abandoned factories whose windows were black holes at night. Only one narrow two-lane road ran past the warehouse and curved into the woods. No streetlights, no other businesses still open after dark. My job was mostly mindless. I manned the receiving bay from midnight to 8 a.m., checking in late deliveries from long-haul truckers. The other overnight employees worked in a separate section, loading pallets or driving forklifts, and I rarely saw them except for breaks. The warehouse was cavernous, with high metal shelves stacked to the ceiling and wide concrete aisles that swallowed sound. Even with the heaters running, the air stayed cold enough that you could see your breath. The first few weeks went by quietly. Most nights only one or two trucks came through, and I spent the rest of the shift drinking coffee and scrolling on my phone. But then I started noticing odd things. It began with a smell, something faint and sweet, like rotting fruit, that would drift through the receiving bay when no trucks were there. I'd look around for a spill, but there was nothing. Then one night, I found a set of wet footprints leading across the concrete from the bay doors to the middle of the floor. Bare footprints. They ended abruptly near one of the shelves. No puddle, no dripping trail back to the doors. I told myself it was a prank from one of the other workers, but there was something about the size of those footprints, long and narrow, like a child's but distorted, that made my skin crawl. A week later, the first truly strange thing happened. I was scanning in a shipment when the overhead lights above aisle 7 flickered, went out for a moment, then snapped back on. The forklifts were parked. No one was in that section. I glanced up at the security monitor on my desk. We had feeds from each aisle. On the screen for aisle 7, I saw movement, something tall and pale slipping between two rows of shelves. I leaned closer. The feed glitched, breaking into static for a second. When it cleared, the aisle was empty. I left my desk and walked slowly down aisle 7. The smell hit me immediately, the same sweet, rotting scent I'd noticed before. The concrete was wet in a few spots, like condensation but thicker. My boots left prints. No one else was there. That night, when I clocked out at 8 a.m., my manager was waiting near the door. She looked tired. I told her about the flickering lights and the footprints. She gave me a long look and said, "This building's old. Pipes sweat. Cameras glitch. Don't let it spook you." 2 nights later, at around 3:15 a.m., I was alone at the desk again. The other workers were on break. The bay doors were shut. I heard the sound of a forklift engine start up deep in the warehouse, even though I could see all the forklifts lined up against the wall. Then, faintly, I heard a child laughing. It was a thin, high giggle that echoed off the metal shelves. I stood up so fast my chair rolled back. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed, but there was no answer. On the monitor for aisle 9, I saw it again. Not a child. Taller than me, but impossibly thin, its arms too long, its head brushed the hanging lights. It moved in a jerky, loping way like it wasn't used to walking upright. It slipped out of view behind a stack of pallets. I ran toward aisle 9 with my flashlight. Nothing, just silence and that sweet smell, stronger now, almost choking. I swept the beam up and down the shelves. Nothing. When I turned to go back to the desk, I saw wet footprints on the concrete leading directly toward me from the far end of the aisle. They were spaced too far apart to be human. They stopped about 6 feet in front of me. I backed up, heart hammering, and stumbled into one of the shelves, knocking a box loose. It hit the floor with a crack. The sound echoed, and the smell faded, just like that. The footprints were still there, glistening in the flashlight beam. I didn't sleep that day when I got home. I sat on my couch, blinds drawn, trying to convince myself I was overtired, hallucinating. But when I closed my eyes, I could see those footprints leading toward me, could smell that rotting sweetness. I went back the next night anyway. Rent doesn't pay itself. The shift started normal. The first truck came and went. At 1:45 a.m., the bay doors rattled like someone was banging on them from outside. I grabbed the crowbar we kept by the desk and swung the door open. Nothing but cold air and empty pavement. The rattling stopped. From somewhere deep in the warehouse, I heard the echo of that same thin giggle. I slammed the door and locked it. The lights flickered overhead. All the monitors went to static for several seconds. When they cleared, every single feed showed the same thing. An aisle somewhere in the building, but filled with rows of tall, pale shapes, all standing perfectly still between the shelves. Their heads were tilted at different angles, their arms hanging long and loose. I couldn't tell which aisle it was. The angles kept changing, like the cameras were inside the thing's eyes, looking back at me. Then one of the shapes on the screen turned its head toward the camera, and I swear its skin split where a mouth should have been. I bolted for the side door that led to the parking lot. As I yanked it open, the smell hit me like a wall, and for an instant I saw a tall, pale arm sliding out of the shadows toward me. I shoved the door open and ran. I didn't stop running until I was on the main road with the warehouse a speck behind me. I called my manager from the shoulder, babbling about something in the building. She said the security team had just checked the place and found nothing. I quit the next day, didn't go back for my last paycheck. A month later, the warehouse closed after a structural issue in the foundation. But I heard from another former worker that night, crews had been reporting shadows and voices for years. Sometimes now, when I'm driving past an industrial park at night, I'll roll up my window if I catch even the faintest whiff of that sweet, rotting smell. And once in a while, when I glance in my rearview mirror, I could swear I see wet, bare footprints appear on the road behind my car before fading into the dark. Story, the end. I was 22 when I first started working the night shift at a gas station off Route 19 in western Pennsylvania. The town was small, mostly quiet, the kind of place where people recognized each other's cars before they even saw who was driving. I took the job because it fit my schedule, paid better than flipping burgers, and I thought I could handle the quiet nights alone. I figured it would just be long stretches of boredom, broken up by the occasional drunk guy buying beer before cutoff or truckers fueling up. That was fine with me, but the longer I worked there, the more I realized nights are different. The same place that feels normal in the daylight feels wrong after midnight. Empty roads look endless, streetlights flicker like they're struggling to hold back the dark, and every little sound you'd ignore during the day becomes sharp and heavy at night. And in that store, I learned what it was like to feel hunted without ever seeing what was stalking me. The first couple of weeks, nothing unusual happened. I'd clock in around 10:30 p.m., relieve the evening clerk, and spend the first hour restocking shelves, wiping counters, and making coffee for the night. By midnight, the place was dead quiet. Occasionally, a car would pull in, headlights cutting across the windows, and I'd ring someone up for cigarettes or energy drinks. Most nights, though, I was alone with the hum of the coolers in the background and the buzzing fluorescent lights above me. It was during my third week that I noticed the first strange thing. It was around 1:45 a.m., and I was sweeping the floor near the coffee station. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement outside the windows. At first, I thought it was just a car driving by on the road, but when I looked up, there was no one. No car, no person, nothing, just the dark lot and the woods that stretched behind the store. I told myself it was my imagination. Everyone gets spooked working nights alone, right? Still, I found myself glancing at the windows more than usual, half expecting to see someone standing there. The following week, I had another odd experience. It was just after 3 a.m. when I heard the bell above the door chime, the sound it makes when someone walks in. I looked up from my book, expecting to see a customer, but the store was empty. The door hadn't opened. The chime just rang by itself. I checked the security cameras, thinking maybe I had missed someone slipping in, but the monitors showed nothing. The parking lot was empty. The aisles were clear. That one bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I tried to laugh it off when I told my coworker the next morning, but he gave me a strange look and said, "Yeah, that bell does that sometimes. Don't worry about it." The way he said it, like he wanted to drop the subject, made me feel worse. As the weeks went on, more small things started happening. Stock would be moved when I knew I had put it somewhere else. A stack of candy bars would be neat one minute, messy the next. The lights in the cooler would flicker when I walked past, and sometimes I swore I heard footsteps in the aisles, slow and deliberate, like someone pacing. Every time I checked, no one was there. One night in late October, I had my first truly terrifying experience. It was around 2:30 a.m., and I was behind the counter, half asleep, when I heard what sounded like knocking. Not on the door, but from the back of the store, near the storage room. At first, I thought it was just boxes settling, but the knocking kept going. 3 slow knocks, a pause, then 3 more. I grabbed the baseball bat we kept under the counter for protection and walked toward the back. My palms were sweaty, and I could hear my own breathing. When I reached the storage room, the knocking stopped. I pushed the door open with the bat, expecting to see someone hiding inside, but the room was empty. Boxes stacked, shelves neat, nothing out of place. I stood there for a long moment, listening. That's when I heard it, a whisper. Faint, right behind me. I couldn't make out the words, but it was enough to make every hair on my body stand up. I spun around, bat raised, but no one was there. The aisles were empty, the store silent. I didn't finish that night behind the counter. I stayed outside near the pumps until my shift ended, sitting on the curb with my bat across my lap. It was freezing, but I couldn't bring myself to go back inside alone. After that, I started dreading going into work. Every night felt heavier, like something was waiting for me. The air in the store felt different too, thicker somehow, as if the walls were closing in. Customers who came in late at night would sometimes comment on it. One trucker told me, "Man, your store gives me the creeps. Feels like somebody's breathing down my neck in here." He laughed afterward, but I could tell he wasn't really joking. Things escalated a couple of weeks later. It was close to 4 a.m. when the power went out. One second, the store was lit up by the buzzing fluorescents. The next, I was in complete darkness. The only light came from the faint glow of the street lamp outside. The hum of the coolers died, leaving a silence so deep it felt unnatural. I stood frozen behind the counter, waiting for the backup generator to kick in, but it didn't. That's when I heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, dragging footsteps moving down the chip aisle toward me. I gripped the bat, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The footsteps stopped. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tense. Then, from the end of the aisle, I saw something. A shadow darker than the rest, tall and thin, just standing there. It didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there, watching. I blinked, and the emergency lights flickered on. The aisle was empty. No shadow, no footsteps, nothing. I called my manager that morning and begged him to put me on the day shift. He laughed it off, told me night shifts weren't for everyone, but he didn't switch me. Said he couldn't spare anyone else for nights, so I kept working, and the nights kept getting worse. There were times I'd catch glimpses of something in the convex mirrors at the ends of the aisles, a face that wasn't mine, staring back. Once, I saw a man standing near the coffee station in the reflection, but when I turned around, the area was empty. The coffee pots were steaming like they had just been used, even though I hadn't brewed any in hours. Another night, around 1 a.m., a woman came in. She looked normal enough at first, middle-aged, wearing a coat even though it wasn't cold. She walked slowly through the aisles, not picking anything up. When she came to the counter, she didn't set anything down. She just stared at me with wide, unblinking eyes and said, "You shouldn't be here." Before I could respond, she turned and walked out the door. I hurried to the window, but when I looked outside, the lot was empty. No car, no footprints, well, nothing. I tried to tell myself I was overtired, that I was imagining things, but the fear never left. Every creak of the building, every flicker of the lights made me jump. I started carrying my phone in my pocket at all times, ready to dial 911, though I doubted I'd ever have the chance. The worst night came in December. Snow had been falling all evening, and by midnight the roads were empty. I was alone in the store, staring at the monitors, when I saw movement on the camera facing the back door. A figure was standing there, just outside in the snow. No car tracks, no footprints leading up to it, just a man-shaped figure in the dark. I watched, frozen, as it stood there for nearly 5 minutes. Then, without moving its legs, it was suddenly closer to the door. One frame it was 15 feet away, the next it was pressed against the glass. I ran to the back with the bat, but when I got there, the door was shut tight, snow undisturbed, no footprints, no figure, nothing. When I turned back toward the counter, I froze. On the floor in front of the coffee station, written in melted snow, were the words, "I see you." That was the last straw. I quit the next morning, no notice, no explanation. My manager called me lazy, told me I'd regret it. But I didn't care. I couldn't go back in there. It's been years since then, but I still can't drive past that gas station at night without feeling it watching me. I still wake up some nights to the sound of that door chime in my dreams, the soft drag of footsteps across tile, the whisper saying I shouldn't be there. Sometimes I even smell coffee brewing in my apartment when I know I haven't made any. I don't know what I saw or what followed me, but I know this. Night shifts aren't empty. They're not quiet. They belong to something else. And if you stay long enough, you'll meet it. Story the end. The hospital always felt different at night. During the day, St. Joseph's bustled with the chaos of routine. Doctors moving briskly between rooms, families crowding waiting areas, the constant chorus of phones ringing and intercom calls echoing through the hallways. But once visiting hours ended and the sun slipped behind the horizon, the place changed. It didn't just quiet down, it felt abandoned, like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something unseen. I had been working the night shift for almost 2 years. At first, I told myself it was temporary, a way to get my foot in the door as a registered nurse while waiting for a day shift to open. But months turned into years, and somehow I was still clocking in at 11 p.m. and clocking out just after sunrise. Some people can adapt to the rhythm, but there's a toll it takes on you. Your body never quite feels right, like you're living in a parallel world to everyone else. That November night, I remember being especially tired. I'd already worked 3 nights in a row, and fatigue hung on me like a weight. My scrubs felt stiff, my shoes pinched at my toes, and even the taste of the bitter coffee I grabbed from the vending machine didn't do much to shake the fog from my brain. I walked through the lobby and nodded to Dave, one of the security guards who worked nights with me often. He was a big guy in his 50s with a calm presence that always made me feel a little safer. "You're in for a quiet one tonight," he said as I swiped my badge and headed for the elevators. "Not a whole lot of people up there." "I'll take quiet," I said, forcing a smile. I should have known better than to say that out loud. Quiet nights in a hospital usually meant the opposite. The 3rd floor, where I spent most of my time, was the surgical recovery wing. Half the rooms were empty that night, their beds neatly made, monitors turned off, lights dimmed. Only a handful of patients were scattered across the floor. An older woman recovering from a gallbladder removal, a young guy who'd been in a car accident, and a middle-aged man, Mr. Ferguson, who had undergone a major cardiac surgery. I made my rounds, checking vitals and IVs, logging numbers into charts. Everything was standard, almost dull, and for the first couple of hours, I found myself lulled into that half-alert state where you're just going through the motions. But around 1:30 in the morning, something small pulled me out of that routine. It started with a smell. Hospitals always carry a mixture of scents: antiseptic, latex gloves, sometimes the faint tang of disinfectant. But what drifted down the hallway was different. It was sharp, metallic, unmistakable. The smell of blood. I froze outside room 312, wrinkling my nose. I checked my gloves, thinking maybe I'd brushed against something earlier, but they were clean. The smell was stronger near the door. When I stepped inside, the patient, an older man with thinning hair and a sallow face, was asleep. His monitors showed a steady rhythm. The IV was fine. There was no blood anywhere. Still, the smell clung to the room, thick enough that I found myself swallowing hard. I wrote a note in the chart and moved on, but unease followed me down the hall. About 20 minutes later, I heard it. At first, I thought it was the squeak of a gurney wheel, but the sound didn't match. It was a dragging noise, slow, deliberate, like someone was pulling their feet along the floor. I paused by the nurse's station, straining to listen. The sound echoed faintly, coming from the far end of the hall, but when I turned the corner, the hallway was empty. "Hello?" I called softly. My voice seemed to vanish in the sterile air. No answer. I told myself it was probably the janitor. Ed worked nights too, usually quiet as a shadow, but I'd seen him pushing his mop down that hall before. Feeling silly, I went back to charting, but the sound kept coming back, every so often. Drag, drag, like someone who didn't want to be noticed but couldn't hide completely. By 2:45 a.m., I was jittery. I went to the break room to pour another coffee. When I returned, the phone at the nurse's station was ringing. I picked it up. "Third floor, this is Emily." For a moment, there was nothing but static, then, faintly, breathing. It was slow, heavy, almost wet-sounding. "Hello?" I asked again. A voice finally came through, hoarse, whispering, strained. "Get out!" My stomach dropped. "Who is this?" The line went dead. I sat frozen with the receiver pressed to my ear long after the dial tone returned. I decided to check the rooms again. My first stop was Mr. Ferguson in room 314. He was awake, staring at the ceiling. When I leaned over to adjust his IV, he turned his head toward me, his eyes wide. "Do you hear it?" he whispered. I frowned. "Hear what?" "The man walking." His voice trembled. "He's been outside my door all night." The words chilled me because he had described exactly what I'd been hearing. "There's no one out there," I said gently, though I wasn't sure I believed myself. "You're safe. Try to get some rest." He shook his head, his lips pale. He stopped at my door. He tried the handle. I swallowed hard and checked his monitor again just to have something to do. His vitals were stable, though his heart rate was higher than before. I promised to check on him soon and left, but when I stepped into the hallway, my own pulse was racing. At 3:15, the lights flickered. It wasn't unusual in older buildings. Sometimes the generators hiccuped or a circuit was overloaded, but the timing made my skin crawl. The dragging sound picked up again, closer this time, as though just around the corner. I grabbed my flashlight, though the overheads were still on, and walked toward the sound. That's when I saw him. A man, tall, thin, shoulders hunched, was standing at the far end of the hall. His back was to me, and he wore what looked like an old hospital gown, stained and frayed at the edges. His bare feet were the source of the dragging sound. One of them seemed twisted, past the toes dragging limply behind him. "Sir?" My voice came out weaker than I intended. He turned his head slowly, unnaturally far, until I saw his face. Pale, sunken cheeks, eyes dark and hollow. His mouth was open slightly, but no breath fogged in the cold air of the hall. I blinked, and he was gone. My flashlight beam cut across the empty hallway. The silence that followed pressed in on me until my ears rang. I backed away, my hand trembling as I held the light. At the nurse's select station, I reached for the phone to call security. But before I could dial, the phone rang again. I picked it up with a shaking hand. This time the voice was a child's, high-pitched, weak. "Help me, please." My throat tightened. "Where are you?" But the line went dead. For the next hour I kept busy with charts and vitals, trying not to think about what I'd seen. But the dragging sound kept returning, always fading before I could pinpoint it. Patients stirred in their rooms, and some calling for me, others wide awake with fear in their eyes. Mrs. Lawson in room 308 grabbed my wrist when I adjusted her pillow. "There's a man walking," she whispered. He was looking in my window. Her window overlooked the third-floor courtyard, 3 stories up, no ledges, nothing a man could stand on. At 4:30, I went to check the supply closet. When I opened the door, the smell of blood hit me again, stronger than before. My stomach flipped, and I clicked on my flashlight. The closet was empty, except for shelves of gauze, IV bags, and gloves. But on the far wall, written in something dark and smeared, were the words, "You shouldn't be here." I stumbled back, heart pounding. When I blinked, the wall was clean, just white paint. I called down to the lobby. "Dave, it's Emily. Can you come up here?" "On my way," he said, his calm voice a lifeline. While I waited, I checked room 312 again. The old man inside was awake now, sitting upright, his eyes wide and terrified. "He was just here," he whispered, "standing at the foot of my bed." My skin prickled. "Who was?" "The one with the broken foot. He told me I wasn't supposed to be here." I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, the lights went out. The hallway plunged into darkness. My flashlight flicked on automatically, but the beam shook in my trembling hand. That's when I heard it, right outside the door. Drag, drag. The handle began to turn. My breath caught in my throat. The door creaked open a few inches, and in the narrow gap, I saw him again. The man in the tattered gown, head tilted, hollow eyes staring straight at me. Then the door slammed shut. I staggered back, nearly dropping my flashlight. Moments later, Dave arrived, flashlight in hand. I explained what happened, words tumbling out, but he looked skeptical. We did a sweep of the floor together. Nothing. Empty halls, quiet rooms. By the time the morning shift arrived, everything was back to normal. Lights steady, no strange sounds, patients calm again. But I knew what I had seen. Later, I asked around. An older nurse pulled me aside. "You've been on third floor nights?" she asked softly. I nodded. She sighed. "Years ago, a patient escaped surgery recovery. He was delirious, ripped out his IV, tried to walk, but his foot was crushed in an accident before he came in. He dragged himself through the halls like bleeding out. By the time they found him, it was too late. They say he still walks those halls at night." I didn't want to believe it, but every detail lined up: the dragging sound, the blood smell, the gown. I finished my shift, but I never worked alone on the third floor again. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night to the faint echo of dragging footsteps, as if he followed me home, still searching, still trying doors in the dark. Story the end. It was just past 11 at night when I walked into the factory for my first solo night shift. The place had been operating for decades, a sprawling, labyrinthine complex of metal walkways, conveyor belts, and storage rooms stacked high with crates. I'd worked in industrial security before, but this was my first night at a facility like this, one that produced small electronics with machinery that hummed and hissed even when dormant. My name is Jason, and I was hired as the overnight security officer, responsible for monitoring the property, checking the cameras, and ensuring that no unauthorized personnel entered after hours. At first, everything seemed normal. I clocked in, grabbed my flashlight, and began my initial rounds. The overhead lights flickered in patches as I walked the wide concrete corridors. There were rooms filled with soldering stations, storage areas that smelled of oil and plastic, and offices that had long been abandoned. The building was old, and the air carried the metallic tang of machinery mixed with the faint scent of damp concrete. I made a mental note to be thorough. Old factories had a tendency to hide accidents in their shadows. Around midnight, as I passed the packing floor, I noticed the first anomaly. One of the conveyor belts, which should have been completely still, shuddered slightly. I approached cautiously, shining my flashlight down its length. Nothing. The belt was empty, no machinery engaged, and yet it had moved. I chalked it up to a residual vibration or perhaps a mechanical hiccup, making a note to report it in my nightly log. By 1 a.m., the building had settled into a rhythm of oppressive silence. I continued my rounds, checking doors, windows, and the occasional office space. I noticed the overhead lights flickered more frequently in one particular hallway near the old maintenance rooms. The air there felt colder, heavier, and there was a faint odor, something like burnt plastic mixed with mildew. I paused, trained my flashlight down the corridor, but saw nothing. A door at the far end, which should have been locked, was slightly ajar. I didn't remember seeing it that way during my initial walk. My heart rate picked up, but I forced myself to check. Inside the maintenance room, everything seemed in order. Tools hung on their racks, spare parts stacked neatly, and the floors swept. Still, a faint scratching noise emanated from the far corner of the room. It was irregular, like claws dragging across concrete. I stepped closer, shining the flashlight toward the source. There was nothing there. I checked the cameras later. No one had entered the room. The scratching sound, however, continued intermittently throughout the night. At 2:30 a.m., I made my way to the second floor, which housed the administrative offices. The fluorescent lights here were older, buzzing faintly. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed something strange. The office doors, which had been closed during my initial rounds, were now slightly open. Not fully, just enough that the gaps created small slivers of darkness into which my flashlight couldn't penetrate. I checked each one. Files were stacked as they had been, computers powered down. Nothing seemed disturbed, yet the open doors suggested someone or something had been here after I first walked the hall. By 3 a.m., I was beginning to feel the weight of solitude. The facility seemed to breathe around me, the hum of machines and air ducts growing louder when I stopped moving. I sat briefly at the security desk to review the camera feeds. Most were operational, but several had frozen frames showing empty rooms with shadows stretching in odd angles as if the camera itself had been manipulated. One feed from the loading dock showed what appeared to be a figure standing near a stack of crates. My stomach turned. I replayed the footage multiple times. The figure vanished each time I approached the camera feed. A little after 4 a.m., the first real terror began. I had gone back to the factory floor to check on the conveyor belts when I noticed movement in the shadows. I could see a figure, tall and thin, standing near the end of the assembly line. My flashlight beam hit it, but there was no response, no acknowledgement. Then it vanished. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the machinery. But a creeping unease settled in my chest. The shadows felt alive, shifting just out of sight as I moved. As I moved through the facility, the temperature dropped sharply. My breath fogged in the air despite the building being climate-controlled. Machines powered on briefly, their lights flickering and then dying, their whines and clicks echoing in the empty space. Doors slammed gently in the distance. Footsteps, soft and dragging, echoed behind me, though when I turned, there was nothing there. The weight of something unseen pressed in from all sides, oppressive and suffocating. At 5 a.m., I tried to call the local police, convinced I had stumbled into a break-in, or perhaps trespassers. The phones were dead. I ran to the main security office, but the cameras showed only empty hallways, no evidence of the figure I had seen moments before. The radio crackled with static, then a whisper. "You shouldn't be here." I froze. The voice was low, guttural, and came from nowhere, echoing throughout the building. I searched the area, flashlight shaking in my hand, but the hallway was empty. I decided to leave immediately, heading for the main exit. But the doors, which I had unlocked hours earlier, were now sealed. Panic gripped me as I tried every exit, every stairwell, each one locked or leading to areas I did not recognize. The factory itself seemed to twist around me, hallways stretching impossibly long, doors appearing where none had existed, rooms I had never seen before. The shadows moved in concert, circling me, whispering my name in low, distorted tones. By 5:30 a.m., I found myself trapped in a small storage room on the second floor. I could hear the dragging footsteps outside, circling always just beyond the door. The flickering lights revealed the shapes of crates and boxes moving slightly as if nudged by unseen hands. My phone and radio were dead. I pounded on the door, screamed, begged, but no response came. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices, some familiar, some alien, all insisting, "You shouldn't be here." The figure appeared again at the far end of the hallway, now fully visible. It was impossibly tall, a shadow against the dim lights, face featureless, only a suggestion of eyes and mouth. It raised a hand slowly, deliberately. The room's air grew thick, heavy, choking me. My legs refused to move. I realized that the factory had become a maze, reshaping itself to trap me. Each door led to another corridor, each hallway to another shadowed room. At 6 a.m., the morning shift arrived. The first employee who walked in found me curled on the floor of the security office, pale and trembling. I tried to explain, but my words were incoherent. They thought I had simply had a nightmare or a panic attack. They called the paramedics, who examined me and found nothing physically wrong. I was dismissed, sent home with orders to rest. But I knew what I had experienced was real. I returned to the factory only once during a daylight shift. The place seemed normal, mundane, alive only with the usual hum of machinery and human activity. The shadows, the figures, the whispering, all gone. Yet I could not forget. The memory haunted me, a weight that pressed in whenever I was alone or in a silent building. Months later, I learned that several night shift workers had quit abruptly over the years, some citing exhaustion, others describing strange occurrences, footsteps in empty corridors, lights flickering, whispers in the dead of night. A few had vanished without explanation. their disappearance logged as accidents or medical emergencies. No one spoke much about it publicly, but those who worked there knew the truth. The factory was not just a building, it was a labyrinth alive with something ancient, patient, and malevolent. I moved across states, changed careers, tried to leave the experience behind, but I never truly escaped it. Even now, years later, when I pass a darkened warehouse or an empty industrial building at night, I feel it. The weight in the air, the subtle shift of shadows, the whisper of a voice just beyond the edge of hearing. I know it is still there, waiting, patient, ready to trap anyone who dares wander alone in the dead of night. The memory never leaves, and I know that some places are alive in ways we can never understand, feeding on fear, solitude, and the vulnerability of those who walk their halls after dark. Story the end. It was 11:45 p.m. when I clocked in at the hospital for my first night shift on the floor. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly above the entrance, and the parking lot was nearly empty except for a few cars whose owners were likely in the ICU or labor and delivery. I had transferred from a day shift position in another department, thinking nights would be quieter, simpler, a chance to get some peace while still doing meaningful work. I was wrong. The first couple of hours passed slowly. Admissions were light, the hallways echoing faintly with the distant hum of the ventilation system and the occasional beep of a monitor from the ICU. I walked my rounds, checking on patients, making sure vitals were stable. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until I reached room 312. It was a small, private room at the end of the hall. The patient inside was a man in his 50s, admitted for severe pneumonia. I had checked him during my orientation, and he was resting comfortably. This time, though, when I pushed open the door, the bed was empty. I frowned, looking around the room. The chair by the window was pulled out, and the TV was on low static. I called his name softly, but no response. Assuming he might have gone to the bathroom, I stepped into the hallway. The floor was silent except for my own footsteps, which seemed unnaturally loud against the polished linoleum. I glanced down the corridor. Nobody was there. I checked the nurse's station. Everyone was busy charting. "Hey, has anyone seen Mr. Jensen from 312? I asked. One of the night nurses, a woman named Carla, looked up from her computer. "He's right there. He's been asleep all night," she said, her voice calm, matter of fact. I turned, expecting to see him in his bed. He was. The same patient, tucked under the blankets, breathing steadily. My stomach twisted. I was certain the bed had been empty a moment ago. Shaking my head, I told myself it was a trick of the light or fatigue. Night shifts were notorious for messing with your mind, after all. By 1:30 a.m., things had started to feel off. A faint smell of something burned lingered in the air, like scorched plastic or hair. It was strongest near the supply closet at the end of the hall, a place I rarely needed to go. I ignored it at first, figuring it was coming from the heating system or some leftover cooking smell from the cafeteria. Around 2 a.m., the hospital went quiet. Even the monitors seemed to mute themselves. The usual distant sounds of chatter, the wheeled gurneys, the paging system, everything fell into a silence so complete it pressed against your ears. That's when I heard it. A soft, dragging sound, like someone shuffling along the carpeted floor in socks. I froze, straining to listen. It came from the end of the hallway, past the rooms, near the old wing of the hospital that had been converted into storage. No other staff were there. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" My voice sounded strange to me, echoing oddly against the walls. There was no answer, just the shuffling sound, slowly coming closer. I grabbed my flashlight from the belt at my side, standard night shift equipment, and started walking toward the source, my heart hammering in my chest. The sound stopped abruptly, leaving only the soft hiss of the HVC. I shone the light into the storage rooms, but they were empty. Shelves of supplies stared back at me, boxes labeled with gloves, syringes, and old patient gowns. I turned to leave when I noticed the faint outline of a figure at the far end of the hall. It was tall, thin, standing completely still. At first I thought it was another staff member, but then it moved, or rather, it didn't walk. It glided, almost hovering above the floor, coming toward me without a sound. My pulse quickened. I called out again, louder this time. "Hey! Who's there?" The figure stopped, and then it tilted its head. That's when I noticed it had no face, not eyes, nose, or mouth, just a smooth, featureless expanse of skin where the face should have been. I stumbled backward, the flashlight shaking in my hand. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. I wanted to run, but my feet felt like they were stuck in glue. Then it whispered, not in a normal voice, more like a low vibration in my chest. "Why are you here?" I screamed, and the figure dissolved into the shadows. When I blinked, it was gone. I ran back to the nurse's station, panting and sweating. Carla looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Everything okay?" she asked casually. I tried to explain what I saw, but my words felt absurd, even as I spoke them. I saw something. It had no face. Carla frowned. "The night shift gets to you sometimes. You need to slow down on the caffeine." I nodded, but couldn't shake the unease. I walked back to the hall where I'd seen the figure, but it was empty. The smell of burned hair lingered faintly, but there was no one there. Around 3 a.m., a patient alarm went off in room 306. I rushed over. It was a young woman recovering from surgery. She was awake, screaming, thrashing against the restraints. "Get out! Get out of my room!" she shouted. I tried to calm her, but she was inconsolable. Her eyes were wide, panicked, and when she caught sight of me, she recoiled as if I were a monster. I called for backup, and 2 other nurses came in to assist. After sedating her and calming her down, she muttered something under her breath repeatedly. The man with no face." I froze. "What man?" I asked. She shook her head violently. He's in the halls. Watching. I can see him. He's coming for me." I was shaking, and my colleagues were starting to notice. We tried to reassure her, and eventually she drifted back into sleep, exhausted. I couldn't get her words out of my mind. By 4 a.m., the hospital felt heavier. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting long shadows that seemed to move even when no one was walking past. I walked the hallways, checking on patients, but every few steps I felt it, like eyes on the back of my neck. When I turned, there was nothing there, but the sensation was so strong, so visceral that it made my skin crawl. In the supply closet at the end of the hall, the smell of burning hair was stronger now, and I noticed that some boxes had been knocked over, supplies strewn across the floor as if someone had been rifling through them. I had walked that corridor not 10 minutes earlier. Nobody was there then. At 5:15 a.m., the hospital intercom crackled, but not with normal announcements. Instead, it whispered my name. Soft, urgent. "Daniel. Daniel. Daniel." I jumped, spinning toward the speaker. The voice was distorted, high-pitched, overlapping, impossible to locate. The intercom system should have been silent. It wasn't scheduled to make announcements for another hour. I ran to the main nurse's station and found Carla again. "I'm not doing this." "Something's wrong," I said. She looked at me with concern, but also a hint of skepticism. "You've only been on nights for a few weeks," she said. "It's easy to get paranoid. Let's finish the shift and get some coffee." I wanted to agree, to rationalize it, but deep down I knew I hadn't imagined it. Something was in the hospital that night. Something that moved through the shadows, gliding without a sound, and it was aware of me. By 6 a.m., I was alone on rounds. The other night's staff had left, and the day team hadn't arrived yet. I checked on room 312 again. The patient was awake now, reading quietly. I leaned over to check his vitals, but when I glanced at the clock on the wall, I realized it was 3 a.m., even though only minutes had passed since I left him before. A chill ran down my spine. Time seemed to warp in certain parts of the hospital. The facility itself felt alive, shifting, hiding things in the shadows. I felt like I was being toyed with, like the building had a consciousness. By 7 a.m., the hallways were starting to fill with the day staff. I tried to tell them what had happened, but nobody wanted to hear it. To them, I was just a nervous night nurse, exhausted and jittery. They laughed off my story about the faceless figure and the distorted intercom. That day I went home, but I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. Tall, faceless, gliding silently toward me, whispering my name. I didn't want to go back. I called the hospital director and requested a transfer, citing personal reasons. But the next night, I received a text from the hospital's internal messaging system. No sender, just the words, "We saw you last night, don't leave." I didn't go back. I stayed home, locked the doors, and tried to convince myself it was over. But at 2 a.m., when the world was silent and the wind rattled the windows, I heard it. The drag of socks across linoleum, soft and deliberate. My name, whispered from the hallways, I knew I wasn't in. And I realized then with bone-deep certainty that it didn't matter where I was. Whatever it was, whatever haunted those halls, could follow me. It had already marked me. I never returned to that hospital. I quit nursing altogether. But the faceless figure didn't let me forget. At night, when everything is quiet, I still hear it. The soft, shuffling steps, the low whisper. Why are you here? It waits. Always waiting, and I know one day it will find me again. Story the end. It was just after midnight when I pulled into the parking lot of the industrial warehouse, the dim glow of the streetlights barely cutting through the thick fog that had rolled in over the outskirts of town. I'd been working night shifts for almost 2 years at various locations, but this one felt different. The warehouse itself was a hulking, decaying structure, surrounded by a chain-link fence that had long since rusted through in patches. The kind of place where your own footsteps echo too loudly and shadows seem to move just out of the corner of your eye. I parked my truck, the engine's growl dissipating into the mist, and grabbed my flashlight and security radio. My job was simple on paper: monitor the cameras, check the doors, ensure no one was wandering where they weren't supposed to. But the reality was far more isolating. Most nights were quiet, and you learned to fill the silence with music or audiobooks. But tonight felt different. There was a stillness that made my stomach tighten, a sense of being watched before anything actually happened. I stepped through the main entrance, the heavy metal door groaning like it had been complaining for decades. The interior smelled of rust, old oil, and something I couldn't quite identify. I shrugged it off as just the age of the building. The break room lights flickered weakly, casting long, jittery shadows across the peeling linoleum floor. I plugged in my laptop at the security station, flicked on the monitors, and started my routine rounds on the camera system. Nothing unusual at first. The loading docks were empty, the storage aisles were silent, and the office area looked abandoned. I grabbed my flashlight and decided to do a physical check anyway. It always made me feel better. Walking through the warehouse at night had a rhythm, the scrape of my boots on concrete, the distant hum of an air conditioning unit somewhere in the building, the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. I started in the storage area. The warehouse was filled with towering shelves stacked with crates, most of them unlabeled, and the darkness between the aisles seemed to swallow the light from my flashlight. As I walked, I felt the hair on the back of my neck prickling, like someone was walking right behind me. I spun around. Nothing, just shadows stretching into the corners. I told myself I was imagining it, a trick of the light. Then I heard it, a soft scuff like a shoe against concrete, slow, deliberate. I froze. The sound didn't come from the aisle behind me, it came from the one ahead. My breath caught. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" My voice sounded wrong in the empty warehouse, too loud, too fragile. I took a cautious step forward, flashlight sweeping the shelves, but the aisle was empty. I shrugged and continued, trying to convince myself it was rats or some small animal. But the noise didn't stop. Footsteps followed me, always keeping a faint distance, never too close. I tried to speed up, checking the monitors in my head. All cameras showed empty aisles. Nothing. Yet the footsteps persisted, always a little behind, a little offbeat. By the time I reached the office section, I was sweating despite the cold. I double-checked the locks on all the doors and sat back down at the monitors. I was just about to breathe a sigh of relief when I noticed movement on the camera covering the main warehouse floor. At first, I thought it was a trick of the grainy footage. Then I saw it. A figure, tall, thin, standing perfectly still in the far corner. Its face was obscured, but it felt like it was staring right at me. I tried calling out, "Hey, security!" but my voice sounded hoarse. My hands shook as I reached for the radio, trying to contact my supervisor. The line was dead. Static. I switched to the cell phone. No signal. The feeling of isolation turned into panic. I grabbed my flashlight and headed back to the main floor. By the time I reached the far corner, the figure was gone. I scanned the area frantically, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, catching only empty crates and long shadows. Then I heard it, a whisper. Low, almost inaudible, coming from behind a stack of pallets. "You shouldn't be here." I froze, my stomach dropping. The voice was human, yet it didn't sound human. raspy, uneven, like it had been buried for years and just clawed its way out. I spun around, but the aisle was empty. My mind raced. I considered calling the police, but the lack of cell signal and the dead radio made it impossible. I was trapped with whatever this was. I decided to move slowly toward the nearest exit, trying to remain calm. Every step echoed, every shadow seemed to twitch. Then I saw it, just at the edge of my flashlight beam, a tall silhouette standing between two rows of shelves. Its movements were jerky, unnatural. It tilted its head, watching me like I was prey. I ran. Concrete beneath my feet seemed endless, the warehouse stretching in ways it shouldn't. The figure moved without sound, gliding through shadows, always keeping its distance, but never letting me escape my own fear. I reached the break room, slamming the door behind me, breathing hard, heart hammering. I tried to call 911 again. This time the phone rang once, twice, then dead silence. My flashlight flickered. I looked up, and the figure was there, in the corner, its face still obscured, its eyes impossible to see. I backed into the wall. It didn't move closer. It didn't need to. Its presence was enough. Hours seemed to pass. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed with fear. Occasionally I thought I heard movement, whispers, the faintest scratching from the walls. The building groaned around me. Eventually the first light of dawn started seeping through the grimy windows. The figure vanished, slipping away like it had never existed. I didn't sleep that day. I didn't tell anyone. The next night I called in sick. I didn't go back to that warehouse. Weeks later, I heard from a former coworker that the warehouse had been abandoned for decades before the company took it over. Stories of workers disappearing during night shifts, of strange sounds and whispers of figures moving in the shadows. It was all true, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I had almost become one of those stories. Even now, sometimes when I'm driving past empty warehouses at night, I feel that same prickling on the back of my neck, that sense of being watched. I know what's out there, lingering in the shadows, waiting for nightfall, waiting for someone to be alone. I haven't worked a night shift since. I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see that figure in the corner, feel its gaze on me, hear that raspy whisper. And I know that if I ever go back, if I ever ignore the warning, it will be waiting. I never thought something so ordinary could be so terrifying. But night shifts teach you things about isolation, about fear, and about what might be lurking just beyond the edges of your perception. Years have passed, but the memory never fades. I still wake up drenched in sweat, convinced I hear footsteps behind my bedroom door. I still avoid empty warehouses, even in daylight, because I know what hides there when the sun goes down. I can't shake it. The fear follows you home. The silence becomes unbearable. The shadows, they remember you. I learned that night what it truly means to be alone, and I learned that some places are not meant for the living after dark. Even now, I work in a day job in a brightly lit office surrounded by people. But at night, sometimes when I close my eyes, I'm back there. Footsteps echo behind me, whispers brush past my ear, shadows move in ways they shouldn't, and I know that somewhere in the darkness it's waiting. No one ever believes these things. People think night shift horror stories are just exaggerations, tales told by overworked, sleep-deprived humans. But I know better. I saw it, I felt it, and I survived. But survival doesn't erase the memory. It doesn't erase the terror that can follow you home. There are nights when I can't sleep, when I hear noises that shouldn't exist, when the shadows in my apartment stretch too long and the cold touches my skin where nothing should be cold. I know what waits for the unwary, what watches from corners, what whispers from darkness. And I know that one day someone else will make the same mistake I did, being alone at night in the wrong place. And then they'll understand. And I'll be there in their mind, reminding them of the thing they cannot see, the thing that cannot be explained, the thing that will not let them leave. Because some places, some moments are meant to trap you forever in the quiet, in the fear, in the endless night that never ends. Story the end. I got the night shift at the hospital about 3 months ago, right after college. I was young, fresh out of school, eager to prove myself, and a little desperate for extra hours. I thought nights would be quieter, maybe even boring, and that it would be a good way to get used to the real pace of working in a hospital. I was wrong. My first few nights were routine enough. The emergency room buzzed with the usual chaos, but most of the floor was calm. By midnight, Most patients were asleep, the monitors beeping steadily, nurses moving through the hallways with soft, deliberate steps. It was peaceful in a way, but there was an underlying tension to night shifts. The hospital feels different when the world outside is dark and the halls echo with emptiness. On my fourth week, around 11:30 p.m., I was making my rounds on the surgical floor. Room 418 had a post-op patient, a middle-aged man recovering from a knee replacement. I had checked his vitals earlier and everything seemed fine. As I approached the room, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I frowned. Hospital protocol was strict about keeping doors closed. Pushing it open, I expected to find him resting, maybe asleep, but the bed was empty. My first thought was that he had gone to the bathroom. I checked the adjoining bathroom. Empty. The hallway outside was silent except for the distant hum of the air vents. I called out his name. Nothing. I went back to the nurse's station to see if anyone had moved him. One of the senior nurses, a woman named Janice, looked up from her charting. "He's right there," she said. I turned back to the room and saw him, tucked in and asleep, exactly where he should be. I blinked and shook my head. I must have imagined it. Night shifts are notorious for messing with your sense of time and perception, I told myself. By 1 a.m., the atmosphere in the hospital started to feel heavier, though. The lights flickered occasionally, which wasn't unusual, but it added to the unease. There was a faint smell, like something burned, just around the supply closet at the end of the hall. I assumed it was a leftover from the cafeteria or maybe the heating system. Around 2 a.m., things escalated. I was checking on a patient in room 421, a woman recovering from gallbladder surgery, when I heard a faint dragging noise from down the hall. It sounded like someone shuffling slowly across the floor. I froze, listening. The sound stopped. I called out, "Hello?" No response. I grabbed my flashlight, a standard part of the night shift kit, and started walking down the hall toward the source. The dragging began again, coming closer. I shined the light down the hallway. The shadows seemed thicker than they should have been, and at the far end I saw a figure. It was tall, thin, standing completely still. At first I thought it was a doctor or another nurse, but then it moved, or rather it glided. No sound from its feet. My stomach turned as I realized it had no face. Just a smooth, pale surface where the features should have been. I tried to speak, my voice trembling. "Who's there?" It tilted its head slightly, as if studying me. Then it whispered, not a normal voice, more like a vibration in my chest. "Why are you here?" I stumbled backward, heart pounding, and the figure dissipated into the shadows as though it had never been there. I ran back to the nurse's station, sweating and shaking. Janice looked at me with concern. "You okay?" she asked. I saw someone. They had no face," I stammered. She frowned. "The night shift can mess with your mind. Maybe you're just tired. Go take a short break." I nodded, but I didn't go anywhere. I stayed at the station, eyes glued to the hallway. Every few minutes, I thought I saw movement in the corners of my vision, fleeting and impossible to catch. At 3:15 a.m., an alarm went off in room 419. I rushed there to find a young man, a new admit, thrashing against the bed rails, screaming, "Get out! Get out of my room!" I tried to calm him, but he was inconsolable. After administering sedatives, he quieted down and muttered repeatedly, "The man with no face, he's coming." I froze. My mind raced. Could it be connected to what I had just seen? I finished my rounds in a daze. By 4 a.m., the hallways felt oppressive, heavy with an unseen presence. Every shadow seemed to stretch and move when I looked away. I kept my flashlight on, but even the circle of light seemed to shift unnaturally, shadows within it twisting. Around 5 a.m., staff started trickling in. I tried to tell them what had happened, but they were skeptical. Janice just gave me a look that said, "It's the nights messing with you." I wanted to believe her. I really did. That night marked the beginning of a series of experiences that I couldn't explain. Objects would move slightly between my rounds, monitors would flicker even when powered down, and the smell of burning hair or plastic would linger in empty rooms. The faceless figure appeared sporadically, always gliding silently, always whispering, always vanishing when anyone else arrived. Weeks later, I was on the night shift again. The hospital was quieter than usual. I was doing my rounds when I passed the supply closet at the end of the hall. The smell was overpowering now, acrid and sharp. I heard the soft drag of movement. My flashlight caught the figure just at the edge of my vision, tall, thin, and still faceless. I tried to back away, but it was like the hall elongated, stretching further than it should. Every step I took seemed to take me closer to it. I turned and ran toward the nurse's station, and when I looked back, it was at the far end of the hallway, gliding silently after me. I reported the incidents to the hospital administration, but they dismissed them as stress, lack of sleep, or overactive imagination. The security cameras showed nothing unusual, just me running, panicked, down an empty hallway. Eventually, I requested a transfer to day shifts. I thought maybe distance would help me escape it. But the last night had changed something. Even in daylight, I felt it lurking, watching. Shadows seemed deeper, corners darker. Months later, I quit nursing altogether. I tried to convince myself that whatever I saw was a combination of fatigue, stress, and imagination. But I could never erase the whispers, the dragging sound, the sight of a faceless figure gliding silently in the dark. Even now, years later, whenever I drive past hospitals at night or hear a faint hum of fluorescent lights, I feel it. The unmistakable, suffocating presence. I have nightmares of endless hallways, of faceless figures at the end of corridors, whispering my name, asking, "Why are you here?" I've moved several times, changed jobs, even changed cities, but it hasn't gone away. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and hear dragging sounds just outside my bedroom, faint, deliberate. Sometimes my phone will ring with no caller ID, and a voice barely audible will whisper my name. I've learned to sleep with lights on, to leave doors open, to talk to myself in the dark, but none of it stops the feeling of being watched, followed, hunted. It isn't just a faceless figure anymore. It's the sense that somewhere, just out of sight, something is waiting, something patient, something that knows I'm afraid. I've read about sleep paralysis, about hallucinations caused by fatigue, about stress-induced delusions. I try to tell myself that's all it was, but the memory is too sharp, too vivid. The smell of burned hair, the way it glided, the impossible warping of hallways, these are not things your brain invents in tired moments. I sometimes wonder if it's a residual energy from the hospital itself. If the place we work in, the lives we witness, end and continue, leaves behind shadows, echoes. Or maybe it's something else entirely, something that chooses the night shift, that thrives in the silence when the world sleeps. I've stopped taking jobs that require night shifts. I avoid hospitals at night, avoid long stretches in darkness. But the faceless figure still comes in my dreams, always gliding closer, always whispering. I wake in cold sweat, heart racing, lights on, praying that it's only a dream. But the next night, when I close my eyes, I hear the soft drag of footsteps across the floor, and I know it's real. I know that it's waiting. I know that it never leaves. I haven't set foot in a hospital since. I don't plan to. But every time I hear a monitor beep, a faint drag in the carpet, or a whisper calling my name, I am reminded. Whatever it was, whatever it is, it doesn't forget. It doesn't sleep. And it waits for you, patient, silent, faceless, in the shadows where the night shift lives. Story the end. It started like any other Thursday night shift at the hospital. I had just finished loading up my backpack with the essentials: snacks, water, a notebook, and my phone, and was mentally preparing myself for another 12 hours of mind-numbing routine. I worked as a night shift security guard at St. Mary's Medical Center, a sprawling, mid-sized hospital in the outskirts of Ohio. It wasn't exactly the most glamorous job, but it paid enough to cover my rent and my student loans while I finished my degree in criminal justice. Most nights, it was boring. Very boring. The hospital itself was an older building with the kind of architecture that made you feel like you were stepping into the past. Long, dimly lit hallways, heavy doors that creaked when opened, and a faint antiseptic smell that never left no matter how many times they cleaned. I'd worked there for about 6 months by the time this night happened, and I thought I knew every hallway, every shortcut, every security camera angle. My first hour on duty was uneventful. I clocked in at 11 p.m., signed the logbook, and walked through the main lobby to check on the emergency room entrance. The night nurse, a cheerful woman named Carol, waved at me as I passed. She was used to my quiet presence, and I was used to hers. The ER was calm, which was unusual for a Thursday night, but I didn't question it. Some nights were slow, others chaotic. By midnight, I had made my rounds through the hospital's east wing, checking patient rooms and making sure all doors were locked. The hallways were mostly empty, save for the occasional janitor pushing a cart or a nurse going to the supply closet. I reached the old maternity ward, a section of the hospital that had been shut down and converted into storage for old equipment and paperwork. The doors to the ward were supposed to be locked, but I noticed one of them slightly ajar. At first, I thought it was just a janitor who had forgotten to close it, but as I stepped closer, I heard a faint noise, like a whisper, coming from inside. I paused. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing slightly in the empty hallway. No response. I pushed the door open slowly. The room was dark, the only light coming from the hallway. Boxes of old medical files and hospital equipment were stacked haphazardly, and a cold draft swept past me, sending a shiver down my spine. I scanned the room with my flashlight, finding nothing out of the ordinary. Shaking my head, I muttered, "Probably just rats or something." I closed the door and made a note to report it during my next check-in. An hour later, around 1:30 a.m., I was in the hospital cafeteria grabbing a cup of coffee. The place was deserted, as usual. I leaned against the counter, scrolling through my phone trying to wake myself up. That's when I heard it, a soft thump coming from the floor above. I froze. The cafeteria was on the ground floor. The maternity ward was on the third. I dismissed it at first. Old buildings creak all the time. But then the thump came again, followed by another in a steady rhythm, like someone walking slowly. I set my coffee down and quietly made my way to the service elevator, thinking I might catch whoever it was. The elevator opened, and I pressed the button for the third floor. The ride felt unusually long, and the hum of the machinery seemed louder than normal. When the doors opened, I stepped into the hallway and immediately felt a chill. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting erratic shadows on the walls. I moved slowly toward the maternity ward, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The thumping had stopped, but now there was another sound, a low, guttural groan that seemed to come from inside the ward itself. I froze again, my heart pounding. Security protocol said to never enter an unoccupied area alone if there was a strange noise, but curiosity got the better of me. I approached the door, noticing that it was now fully closed. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle. The moment I touched it, I felt a cold, almost icy energy seep into my fingers, and a whisper came from inside. "Don't!" I stumbled back, my flashlight swinging wildly. The whispering stopped. I considered calling up, but decided against it. My phone had no signal on the third floor, and the thought of running down the empty hallways in pitch darkness didn't appeal to me. Instead, I decided to report it the next morning and moved to the stairwell to check the upper floors. By 2:15 a.m., I was halfway through my rounds on the fourth floor. The hospital's north wing was almost entirely deserted at this hour. Patient rooms were dark, monitors silent. But then I noticed something strange. The emergency exit signs were flickering, and in the reflection of the polished floors, I could have sworn I saw someone standing at the end of the hallway, a figure in a hospital gown, pale and hunched over. I froze. My training told me to approach cautiously, but instinct told me to run. I clicked on my flashlight and shone it down the hallway. The figure wasn't there. I moved forward, flashlight cutting across the hallway. Still nothing. Then I heard it, a whisper, soft but urgent. "Help me." I spun around, shining the light back toward the stairwell. Empty. My heart was racing, sweat pooling on my forehead. I told myself it was my imagination. Night shifts played tricks on your mind. Lack of sleep, stress, the monotony of the hospital at night. Anyone would see things that weren't there. I resumed my rounds, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. Every time I turned a corner, I felt eyes on me. Every darkened doorway seemed to hide someone just beyond my sight. By 3 a.m., I had checked most of the patient rooms and was making my way back to the security office. That's when the pager went off. It was the code for a patient emergency in the psychiatric ward, a place I hadn't visited much since starting. I grabbed my radio and headed down the corridor, trying to keep calm. The ward was on the opposite side of the hospital, a long walk through dimly lit halls. When I arrived, the ward was eerily quiet. The nurses on duty looked exhausted. One of them, a young woman named Lisa, greeted me nervously. "You didn't hear it?" she whispered. "Hear what?" I asked. "The screaming," she said. It started around 2. We can't find the source. The patients are calm now, but it's like something's still here. I frowned, trying to make sense of it. Psychiatric patients can be unpredictable, but a sudden scream that disappears without explanation? I had no answer. I made a note to check the surveillance cameras. Lisa led me through the ward. All the patient rooms were empty. The beds were made, monitors quiet. The nurses had checked every room. And yet, the feeling of dread was thick in the air. I could see it in Lisa's eyes, too. She was genuinely scared. I checked the cameras, rewinding footage from the past hour. Nothing unusual appeared at first. Patients were in their rooms, nurses patrolling. But then I noticed something on camera 4B, a small hallway that connected the main ward to the therapy rooms. The timestamp showed 2:05 a.m. A shadowy figure, tall and thin, moved quickly across the hallway. It didn't resemble any patient or staff member. The footage was grainy, but it was enough to make my stomach churn. I showed Lisa the footage. She turned pale. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Nobody should have been there. We locked all the doors." I wanted to believe it was a trick of the camera, a glitch, but my gut told me otherwise. Something was in the hospital, something that shouldn't be there. By 4 a.m., the hospital felt alive in a way it never had before. The empty hallways seemed to stretch farther than they should. Shadows danced just outside my vision. Doors creaked open and shut on their own. I heard footsteps behind me, but every time I turned, no one was there. I was making my rounds near the maintenance area when I heard a faint, high-pitched giggle. My flashlight beam landed on a janitor's closet door. It was slightly open, light spilling out from the crack. I stepped closer. The giggling stopped. I reached for the handle. The moment I touched it, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. My flashlight flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged through me. I fumbled for my radio, but it was dead. I ran down the hall, heart hammering, until I reached the stairwell. I tried calling for backup again, but my phone had no signal. The hospital seemed different now. I could feel it pressing in around me, like the walls themselves were alive, watching. I told myself to stay calm. Just finish the shift, get out, and never come back alone. By 5:30 a.m., the first morning shift nurses started trickling in. The hospital slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but the feeling of dread didn't leave me. I reported everything to my supervisor, showing the camera footage. He nodded, but his expression was guarded. "You're not the first guard to see something like this," he said quietly. "Some things you just don't talk about. Just make sure you don't go alone at night." I never went back to the maternity ward. I avoided the psychiatric wing as much as possible. But even now, years later, I can still hear the whispers when the hospital is quiet, feel the cold brush of unseen fingers when the halls are empty. And I know that whatever it was that night, it's still there, waiting, watching, moving through the hospital when no one is looking. Story the end. I worked the night shift at a regional hospital in upstate New York back in 2016. I was 27, had just left a string of lousy restaurant jobs, and figured hospital security would be steady work with benefits. The orientation made it sound simple enough. Monitor the cameras, check doors, escort staff if needed, handle disturbances until local police showed up. What they didn't emphasize was how empty and unsettling a hospital becomes after midnight. It's a place that hums with life during the day, but when the visiting hours end and most of the lights dim, it feels hollow, like you're walking through the skeleton of something that used to be alive. The hospital had 4 main wings: the emergency department on the first floor, the maternity ward, a psych unit on the 3rd floor, and then a partially closed-off 4th floor that had once housed long-term care but now sat mostly unused. My post was a small security office near the ER, but every hour I had to walk patrols through the entire building, scanning checkpoints with a little electronic wand to prove I had been there. Nights were long, tedious, and filled with moments where I would catch myself jumping at the smallest noises. The first month wasn't too bad. I deal with the occasional drunk brought in by cops, or a patient's family member refusing to leave after visiting hours. Those were the expected problems. But once I started walking the upstairs halls alone, I began to feel like there was something I hadn't been warned about. The hospital at night isn't silent. You hear the hum of the air vents, the beeping of machines from patient rooms, and sometimes voices echoing from places you know should be empty. The psych ward was bad enough, with patients screaming or laughing at random hours, but the fourth floor, the one that was supposed to be shut down, that's where the real trouble started. The first time I realized something was off, it was about 2 in the morning. I had walked through the stairwell up to the fourth floor to scan the checkpoint by the nurses' station. The halls were dark except for dim emergency lights, and all the rooms had their doors shut. The smell up there was different too, not the usual antiseptic, but more like dust and faint mildew. As I approached the nurses' station, I heard the distinct sound of a call light dinging, the kind patients use to summon a nurse. I froze because every bed up there was supposed to be empty. I stood still, waiting, and sure enough, the ding came again, followed by the faintest buzz of an intercom speaker. I called down to the ER desk on my radio. "Hey, you guys running anything on 4?" I asked. The nurse on duty, Carla, sounded half asleep when she answered, "No, that floor is closed." "Why?" "Getting a call light buzzing up here," I said. There was a pause. Then she laughed like she thought I was messing with her. "You're imagining things. No one's up there." I didn't argue, but I felt a prickle crawl up my arms. I walked to the nurse's station desk and looked at the panel where the call lights would normally light up. Sure enough, one of the little red bulbs was flashing for room 423. The problem was, the power to that panel should have been cut years ago. I didn't open the door to 423. I scanned my checkpoint, told myself the system must have glitched, and went back downstairs. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had left something unresolved, like walking away from an open flame. Things escalated over the next few weeks. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps ahead of me in the hall when I knew no one else was there. Other times, doors I had checked as locked would be standing open on my second pass. Twice, I thought I saw a figure moving at the far end of the corridor, tall, dressed in what looked like hospital gowns. But both times when I tried to catch up, the hallway was empty. The incident that convinced me I wasn't losing my mind happened one night just before 3 a.m. I was in the stairwell between the third and fourth floors when I heard crying. It sounded like a woman, faint at first, but unmistakable. I paused, thinking maybe one of the psych patients had gotten out of bed, but the sound wasn't coming from below. It was coming from above, on the locked-off fourth floor. I climbed the last few steps and cracked the heavy fire door open. The crying grew louder, echoing down the hall. It was sharp, ragged, like someone in pain. I radioed down to Carla again, telling her I thought someone might have gotten up there, but she swore all the patients were accounted for. "Then who the hell is crying?" I whispered, but she didn't answer. I stepped into the hallway, the crying pulling me toward the far rooms. The sound was clearer than ever, like it was right around the corner. But when I turned, the hall was empty. The crying stopped instantly, like a switch had been flipped. What I heard instead was the slow creak of a door opening down the hall. Room 423. The door I had avoided weeks earlier was now ajar. I stood frozen, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The air coming from the room was colder than the hallway, a sharp drop that raised goosebumps on my arms. I told myself it was probably a broken window, some draft from outside, but my gut told me not to take another step. I backed away, not turning my back until I was through the stairwell door, and I slammed it shut behind me. I filed an incident report that morning, left it on Rick's desk, and went home without sleeping. When I came back the next night, the report was gone, and Rick didn't mention it. When I asked, he brushed me off. "Old buildings make noises. Don't let it get to you." But it did get to me. It kept getting worse. I began dreaming about the fourth floor when I wasn't there. I'd see the hallway stretching longer and longer, doors opening one by one, and a shadow standing at the end, waiting. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, the sound of that crying still echoing in my ears. I started showing up to work tired, jittery, second-guessing everything I heard. One night in late October, things came to a head. I was finishing my rounds when the fire alarm on the fourth floor went off. The panel in the security office lit up red, screaming. Protocol said I had to investigate before the fire department arrived, so I grabbed my flashlight and keys and headed up. The moment I opened the stairwell door, smoke smell hit me. I panicked, thinking the place really was on fire, but when I shined my light down the hall, there was no smoke, just that same dusty air. The alarm blared, echoing off the walls, but what froze me was seeing every single door on the floor standing wide open, and in the center of the hall was a figure. At first, I thought it was a patient, tall, frail, wearing a faded hospital gown. Its head was bent at an unnatural angle, chin nearly touching its chest. The figure swayed slightly as if struggling to stay upright. I shouted, "Hey, you can't be up here," but my voice cracked halfway through. The figure didn't move. I took one cautious step forward, and that's when it snapped its head up. The face was pale, almost glowing in the dim emergency light. Its eyes looked wrong, too dark, too sunken, and its mouth opened wider than it should have, as if unhinged. The sound that came out wasn't crying this time. It was laughter, shrill and broken, bouncing off the empty walls. I bolted. I ran down the stairs, nearly tripping, heart slamming against my ribs. By the time I burst into the ER, the alarm had stopped. Carla looked at me like I was crazy. "What the hell happened to you?" she asked. I couldn't even explain. I just said, "Don't send anyone up there. Ever." I quit a week later. I told Rick I couldn't handle the hours, but the truth was I couldn't face that building anymore. For months afterward, I dreamed of room 423, that laughter chasing me down the hall. Even now, years later, every time I smell antiseptic, I think of that night and the figure standing under the emergency lights. I still don't know if what I saw was real or if exhaustion and nerves broke something in me. But I do know this: hospitals are never truly empty, even when the rooms are. And there are some shifts you carry with you long after you've clocked out. Story the end. I started working the night shift at a small town hospital in Indiana in 2017. It wasn't my first night shift job. I'd worked late hours in diners and even pulled security at a warehouse. But this was different. Hospitals at night are nothing like they are during the day. During the day, there's noise, rushing staff, families, phones ringing, doctors making rounds. At night, everything is stripped back. The lights dim, hallways stretch out empty and sterile, and every sound echoes like it doesn't belong. The stillness can almost trick you into thinking nothing bad ever happens. But the truth is, most of the strangest things I've seen in my life happen between midnight and dawn. I worked on a rotating schedule, 3 nights a week from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. My primary duties as a night shift aide were fairly routine: checking on patients, helping nurses when they needed an extra pair of hands, restocking supplies, and walking the wings to make sure patients weren't wandering off or trying to pull out IVs. Most nights, it was quiet enough to make me wonder why the hospital even needed so many staff overnight. But then, something would happen. A code blue, an elderly patient disoriented and panicking, a new emergency coming through. And it made sense. The wing I usually covered was older than the rest of the hospital. It had been part of the original building from the early 1960s, and you could tell. The tiles were discolored in spots, the ceiling panels didn't all match, and the lights had this faint buzz to them when they flickered. We all joked about how creepy it felt walking down those halls at 3 a.m, but the jokes always came with an undertone. There was an understanding among night staff that the wing had a reputation. You'd hear the stories passed around in the break room. Patients seeing things that weren't there, nurses hearing voices when they were alone, the occasional report of beds being moved slightly out of place. Everyone laughed when they told the stories, but the laughter was nervous. One of my first strange experiences happened about a month into the job. I was doing my rounds on the older wing when I heard what sounded like soft crying. It was faint at first, almost like a child, and I froze because we didn't have any children in that part of the hospital. It was all adults, most of them over 60. I followed the sound down the hallway until I thought it was coming from room 216. I knew that room was empty, since the patient in it had been discharged the previous evening. I pushed the door open, and the room was dark except for the glow from the hallway spilling in. The bed was neatly made, nobody inside, no equipment running. But I swear on my life, the moment I stepped inside, the crying stopped. Not like it faded or moved farther away, just cut off like someone hit a switch. I turned the lights on, checked the bathroom, checked behind the privacy curtain. Nothing. I stood there, my stomach tight, The kind of feeling you get when you walk into a room and know someone else has just left. I reported it to the charge nurse, and she just gave me this look like she'd heard it before. She said, "Don't worry about it. That room's been funny for years." Then she changed the subject. That became the first of many little things I couldn't explain. Over the months, I'd hear the squeak of rubber soles on the linoleum behind me, turn around and find the hallway empty. I'd catch glimpses of someone in white scrubs slipping into a room only to check and find no one there. Patients sometimes asked me to tell the woman at the foot of the bed to stop staring at them. They'd say it like it was just another nurse checking on them, but every time we went in, there was no one. One patient in particular, Mr. Hanley, still sticks with me. He was an older man with late-stage lung cancer, a quiet guy who hardly spoke. One night I was checking on him when he asked, "Can you get that boy out of my room?" I thought maybe he was confused or hallucinating, but I humored him and asked, "What boy?" He pointed to the corner of the room, near the closet. I followed his gaze, but there was nothing there. He shook his head and muttered, "He's been here all night, just staring." That wasn't the first or last time someone mentioned a boy. I'd heard patients mutter about a little boy in the hallways before. It didn't make sense. There hadn't been a pediatric ward in that wing for decades, and none of our patients were children. When I asked some of the older staff, one of them told me that back in the 70s, a young patient had died in that wing after complications from surgery. A boy about 8 years old. Nobody knew if the story was true, but enough people had whispered it over the years that it felt like an open secret. The scariest night of my life there came in January during a snowstorm. The whole city was covered in ice, and the hospital was short-staffed because some people couldn't make it in. I had more ground to cover than usual, and the halls felt emptier than I'd ever seen them. Around 2 in the morning, I was walking past room 223, and I thought I saw movement inside. The curtain was drawn halfway, but I swore I saw someone's silhouette pass across the window in the door. The thing was, 223 was sealed. That room had been shut down for months due to a maintenance issue with the ceiling tiles and wasn't assigned to anyone. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to push the door open. The air inside was cold, colder than the rest of the wing, and the smell was musty, like dust and old linens. The room was empty, completely empty. The bed wasn't even set up. I stood there longer than I should have, straining my ears when I heard it. A whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely a whisper. It came from the far side of the room. Every instinct in me screamed to get out, but I forced myself to take a step forward, then another. I pulled the curtain back all the way, and there was nothing there but an empty corner. The whispering stopped as soon as I looked. I backed out of the room, shut the door quickly, and walked fast down the hall, my skin crawling like I'd walked through a spider web. I didn't tell anyone about that one for weeks because I knew how it sounded. When I finally mentioned it to one of the senior nurses, she didn't even look surprised. She just said, "That's why we keep that room closed." By the time I hit my second year, I had a collection of stories like that. Lights turning on by themselves, elevators opening on empty floors with no one inside, call buttons lighting up from rooms that had no patients in them. I wasn't the only one who saw or heard these things. Other staff backed me up, but management never acknowledged it. Hospitals don't like rumors about hauntings. They want the public to see them as professional, not creepy. But what finally drove me to quit happened on my last month there. It was a Wednesday night, the shift was dragging, and I was doing rounds alone in the older wing again. I came to room 216, the same room where I'd heard the crying my first month, and I noticed the door was slightly open. The room was supposed to be empty. I pushed the door open, expecting it to be dark and still. Instead, the light was on. The bed was occupied. There was a boy lying there. Pale skin, dark hair, maybe 8 or 9 years old. He wasn't hooked up to any machines, no chart at the end of the bed, no wristband. He just lay there, staring at me with these deep, unblinking eyes. My heart jumped into my throat. I blinked hard, thinking maybe I was overtired and imagining things. When I opened my eyes again, the bed was empty. Perfectly made, untouched. I backed out so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. My whole body was shaking. I didn't finish my rounds that night. I sat in the break room, white as a sheet, until another aide came in and asked what was wrong. I just told her I wasn't feeling well. That was my last shift in that wing. I gave my notice not long after. I couldn't do it anymore. The constant sense of being watched, the shadows that didn't belong, the whispers in rooms I knew were empty. Even now, years later, I can still see that boy's eyes in my head. Sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I feel like he's still standing in the corner of my room, just staring, waiting. I've worked other jobs since then, still doing night shifts sometimes, but nothing has ever compared to what I saw in that hospital. People always ask if I believe in ghosts, and I never know exactly what to say. All I know is what I lived through, and I wouldn't wish those nights on anyone. Story the end. The warehouse I worked at was a massive gray concrete structure that always looked more like a bunker than a place of business. It sat off an empty stretch of highway about 20 minutes outside of town, surrounded by tall weeds and cracked asphalt. During the day, trucks constantly came and went, but once the sun dipped, the place emptied out until it was just a skeleton crew left inside. That was when my shift began, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 5 nights a week. I took the job because it paid $1 more per hour than my previous one, and the hours gave me time during the day to help take care of my dad, who had been sick for a while. At first, the job was boring more than anything, but I'd soon learn there was something about that building after dark that just wasn't right. On nights when I clocked in, the place already felt hollow. You could hear your footsteps echo down the endless aisles stacked high with pallets. There were 4 of us scheduled for overnights most nights. Me, a forklift driver named Sam, a stalker named Justin, and the night supervisor, Carla. Sometimes another guy or two would cover, but it was usually just us. 4 people in a building big enough to hold several football fields. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, and the ventilation system let out a low hum, but aside from that, the place felt dead. The first time something weird happened, I thought it was just fatigue messing with me. It was maybe 2 in the morning, and I was scanning boxes into the system when I heard what sounded like someone whistling. It wasn't a tune, just this high-pitched note that rose and fell, almost playful. I looked around, expecting to see Sam driving by on his forklift or Justin messing around, but there was no one. The aisle stretched empty in both directions, the sound of the forklift engine faint in the distance. I shrugged it off, told myself I'd been imagining it. But it happened again a few nights later, this time closer. The whistle carried from behind a stack of pallets like someone was just on the other side, waiting. I walked around to check, half annoyed, half uneasy. Nothing. Just shrink-wrapped boxes of paper towels and cleaning supplies. I laughed it off, forced myself to get back to work. Carla was the first one to bring it up seriously. She pulled us all into the break room one night around 3 a.m., We were sipping burnt coffee and trying to stay awake when she leaned forward and said, "Do any of you hear, like, a whistle sometimes?" The room went quiet. Justin smirked, thinking she was joking, but when she didn't smile back, the smirk faded. Sam grunted and said he'd heard it too, but figured it was just pipes or air in the system. I admitted I'd heard it more than once. That got Carla nervous. She said the night manager before her had warned her about odd stuff happening when the place was nearly empty. Lights flickering, voices when no one was around, tools missing and reappearing in strange places. He'd called it the building's personality. She laughed when she said it, but her voice was tight. After that, I started noticing other things. A shadow would move across the far end of the aisle when no one was there. A pallet jack left in the middle of the floor would be shoved against the wall when I turned back around. And the whistling, always the whistling, got bolder. Sometimes it came from right behind me, so close I could feel the hair on my arms stand up. One night, I was in aisle 14, scanning barcodes, when I heard it again. This time, it was accompanied by footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the concrete floor. I froze, the scanner still in my hand, the little red beam quivering on the box in front of me. "Sam?" I called out. No answer. The footsteps stopped, then silence. I rounded the corner fast, trying to catch whoever it was, but the aisle was empty. I jogged down to the end and looked both ways. Nothing but rows of pallets under the harsh lights. When I got back, the scanner I'd left on the box was on the floor like someone had knocked it from my hand. That night, I couldn't focus. I found myself glancing over my shoulder constantly, heart racing at every little sound. Near the end of the shift, I caught Carla at her desk and asked her straight out if the place was haunted. She gave me this look like she wanted to dismiss it, but couldn't. Finally, she said, "All I know is we don't talk about it too much. If you do, it gets worse." That stuck with me. The following week, things escalated. Justin quit. He didn't give much explanation, just said the job wasn't worth it. But before he left, he pulled me aside in the parking lot. He looked pale, dark circles under his eyes. "Don't stay here, man," he said. "It's not worth it. There's something in there. It watches. It doesn't want us there." I tried to press him, but he just shook his head and drove off. With Justin gone, the shifts got heavier and I had more ground to cover. That meant more time alone in the aisles, and the building took advantage of it. I'd hear whispering now, faint but unmistakable. Sometimes it was my name. Other times it was just a jumble of words I couldn't make out. I stopped wearing my earbuds because I needed to know what was real and what wasn't. One night in late October, the power went out. That almost never happened, but around midnight, the entire building went dark. The emergency lights flickered on, dim red bulbs that cast long shadows across the warehouse. I pulled out my phone flashlight and tried to keep working, but it was useless. Every corner looked like it was hiding something. I heard the whistle again, this time from the far end of the aisle. It echoed strangely in the half-dark. My chest tightened. "Not funny," I shouted. My voice cracked, echoing back at me. No reply. Just silence, and then another long, drawn-out whistle, closer this time. I bolted for the break room where Sam and Carla were. Sam was pacing, cursing about the outage, while Carla was on the phone with maintenance. I didn't mention the whistle. When the lights came back on, things didn't feel the same. It was like the dark had allowed something in. From then on, I started seeing figures, always at the edge of my vision, slipping between aisles. Once, I swear I saw someone crouched on top of a pallet stack, watching me. When I shined my light up, nothing was there. Carla grew more withdrawn. She started keeping her office door locked, only coming out when absolutely necessary. Sam tried to act tough, but I caught him muttering prayers under his breath when he thought no one was listening. The tension was unbearable. The final straw for me happened on a freezing night in December. It was around 2 a.m., and I was assigned to check inventory in the back corner of the warehouse, the section we almost never used. The lights were dimmer there, buzzing weakly. I was halfway through when I heard the whistle again, louder than ever, echoing down the aisle like it was right behind me. My stomach dropped. I spun around, and that's when I saw it. A figure stood at the far end of the aisle. It was tall, impossibly thin, its head cocked to the side. I couldn't make out a face, just a shape darker than the shadows around it. It whistled again, long and piercing. My whole body went cold. I ran. I didn't care about the scanner, didn't care about the job. I sprinted down the aisle, past pallet stacks, my footsteps thunderous in the silence. I didn't stop until I crashed into Sam near the forklift station. He saw the look on my face and didn't even ask. He just said, "Yeah, I've seen it too." That was it for me. I finished the shift, but I never went back. I quit the next morning, told them I couldn't handle the hours anymore. The truth was, I couldn't handle what lived in that warehouse at night. Sam lasted another month before he left. Carla, from what I heard, stayed on longer, but then suddenly transferred out. The warehouse is still running today, still hiring for night shift positions. Every time I drive past it on the highway, I feel that same chill in my chest, and I can almost hear the faint mocking whistle carrying out from the concrete walls. Story the end. It was one of those nights that felt unusually heavy, even before I clocked in. I had just taken a new job as an overnight security guard at a storage facility on the outskirts of a small town in Pennsylvania. The place wasn't large, just a handful of low metal buildings surrounded by chain link fences and a few flickering streetlights that were always on the verge of dying. My schedule was from midnight to 8 in the morning, which suited me fine. I liked quiet, and I didn't mind being alone, though I knew this job was more about vigilance than social interaction. The first couple of nights were uneventful. I walked the perimeter, checked cameras, made sure the gates were locked, and occasionally jotted down notes in my log. It was monotonous, but that monotony was part of the job. I liked the predictability. Then, around my third week, things started to feel off. It began with the cameras. One night, as I scanned the monitors, I noticed something odd. One of the units in the corner building, Unit 12, showed movement. But when I checked the building itself, there was nothing there. No one. I chalked it up to shadows or a glitch in the camera. That explanation worked until the next night when I saw it again. And then, over the following nights, it became more frequent. Someone maybe, was moving inside Unit 12, but every time I went to check, it was empty. The shadows looked wrong too, that almost as if they weren't just cast by light, but by something alive, something lurking. I told myself I was imagining things. Night shifts can play tricks on the mind. But the feeling didn't go away. On the fourth night, I noticed another thing. The gate to the rear lot, the one I'd double-checked every hour, was sometimes slightly ajar when I went to inspect it. Not fully open, just ajar, like someone had pushed it and left it swinging. I always locked it again, checked my logs, and made mental notes. No one else worked nights. No trucks or deliveries came after 10. Yet it kept happening. It escalated slowly. One night, I heard footsteps on the gravel path outside the office trailer. Slow, deliberate steps. I checked the cameras. Nothing. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside. Nothing. I shined the light along the fence line, behind the storage units, under the dumpsters. No one. But the footsteps continued. Not outside anymore, but around the trailer. Around me. Soft at first, then heavier, as if someone or something was pacing just beyond the reach of my flashlight beam. My heart raced. I told myself it was an animal. Raccoons, maybe. But the pattern didn't match any animal I'd ever seen. These footsteps moved like a person, careful and measured, circling the trailer. I started taking notes in a small notebook. Every unusual sound, every fleeting shadow, every camera glitch. I became obsessive. By the second month, my coworkers, who only came in for morning shift handovers, noticed I looked exhausted. I was tired, constantly jittery, always scanning the cameras, always checking the doors. They joked about me seeing things, and I laughed with them, but inside, I knew something was wrong. Then came the first real scare. It was around 3 a.m. when I noticed the office door slowly creak open. I had locked it an hour earlier. I froze, hand on my flashlight, and watched. The door opened just a few inches, then stopped. I flicked the lights on inside the trailer. Nothing. I stepped closer, and the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. My radio, sitting on the desk, clicked on by itself, a low static hissing before fading out. I left the office and walked around the lot. Nothing. Every unit was empty. The gate was closed. No footprints, no evidence of intruders. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind, the old door, a faulty radio. But the feeling, an oppressive, suffocating weight, lingered. Something was here, something unseen. I had no proof, but I could feel it watching. The next week, I started hearing whispers. At first, faint. Almost like the wind rustling through the metal siding, I told myself it was nothing. Until one night, I distinctly heard my name, James. Soft, almost a sigh coming from the end of the lot. I froze. My flashlight shook in my hand. I called out, "Hello?" No answer. I checked the cameras. Nothing. I walked toward the sound, each step making the gravel crunch under my boots. The whisper came again. Closer this time. "James." My stomach dropped. I ran back to the office, slammed the door and locked it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the office, flashlight in hand, scanning the cameras, listening to the whispers that sometimes became soft knocks, taps, and thuds. Unit 12 became the focal point. Every night, something moved in there. Sometimes it was shadows. Sometimes I thought I saw a figure, hunched, watching, vanishing the moment I focused on it. I started sleeping in my car before shifts, but the dreams were worse. Dreams of being watched, of shadows moving along the fences, of whispers coming from the storage units, calling me. It all came to a head on a Friday night. I arrived at 11:50 p.m., my third week into working nights solo, my nerves already frayed. The night was unusually silent. No wind, no cars, just a heavy, pressing darkness. I started my rounds, checking cameras, locking gates, walking the perimeter. When I got to Unit 12, I saw it, an actual figure, not a shadow, standing in the corner. I froze. The figure was tall, thin, its face obscured, but I could feel its eyes on me. It didn't move. It just watched. I radioed for backup. There was supposed to be another guard, but no one answered. My stomach nodded. I stomached closer. The figure didn't react, didn't move. Then, suddenly, it darted into the shadows, faster than anything human could move. I ran after it, circling the unit, flashlight swinging. Nothing. Just empty space. The doors were locked. The unit itself was empty. My heart pounded, adrenaline surging, but logic couldn't explain it. I returned to the office, trying to steady myself. That's when I noticed something on the monitors. A new camera angle, one I didn't install. It showed the interior of the office, and there, standing behind my desk, was the same figure. I spun around. Nothing. The office was empty. My hands shook. I turned back to the monitor. The figure was gone. The camera feed returned to normal. I knew I wasn't imagining it. Something was inside the property, something I couldn't see, something that could move faster than humanly possible. Over the next few nights, I started noticing other things. Doors that were locked would be open the next time I checked. My flashlight would die, even with new batteries. On the cameras, shadows would shift in impossible ways. Sometimes I'd hear soft humming, almost a lullaby, coming from the units. I considered quitting, but I didn't. Something, I don't know what, kept pulling me back, making me stay as if it wanted me there. One night, around 2:30 a.m., I walked past Unit 12 and saw something that stopped me cold. Scratched into the metal door were words, "Don't leave." The scratches were fresh. I checked the surrounding area for footprints. Nothing. My mind screamed at me to run, to call someone, but my legs froze. I could hear faint breathing, slow and deliberate, from the other side of the lot. I called the police. They came, 2 patrol cars, lights flashing. They walked the lot with me, cameras and flashlights, checking every unit. Unit 12 was empty. The scratches were gone. The officers looked at me like I was crazy. They asked if I'd had a rough week, too much coffee, maybe sleep deprivation. I didn't argue. I drove home, but the feeling didn't leave me. When I closed my eyes, I saw shadows moving under my eyelids, and I could hear soft whispers in the dark. The following week, I went back. I couldn't explain why. I think part of me wanted proof, wanted to understand, wanted to confront whatever was haunting that lot. That night, I arrived early before midnight and went through my routine. Everything seemed normal. But around 1:30 a.m., the power flickered. My monitors went black, then came back online. And there, on the screen, Unit 12 was open. The door slowly creaked, though I had locked it minutes earlier. I grabbed my flashlight, heart hammering, and went toward it. The second I stepped into the unit, the door slammed behind me. I spun around, but I was alone. That's when I felt it, cold fingers brushing my shoulder, as if someone or something was standing right behind me. I spun, flashlight swinging, empty. The hairs on my neck stood on end. I ran out of the unit, slammed the door, and locked it. I called the police again. They came, searched, found nothing. They started questioning my sanity. I didn't care. I knew what I felt, what I experienced. But after that night, I stopped going inside Unit 12. I stopped walking the lot alone. I didn't see the figure again, not directly. But the whispers continued, the shadows moved, and sometimes when I glanced at the cameras, I thought I saw someone watching me from the corner of my eye. I started taking double shifts, never staying in one place for too long, always moving, always alert. Months went by. Eventually, I left the job. I couldn't handle it anymore. But I never stopped thinking about it, about the way the lot felt alive, about the whispers calling my name, about the figure in Unit 12, and I know this, whatever it was, it didn't want me gone, and I don't think it ever will. Story the end.